I'm the Dolphin of France. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 126. I accept this great gift from the French Guard. Not yet. Prosper looked embarrassed. You know, we haven't had much contact with the military before. Yesterday, my people just got on the line with the officers of the French Guard. Fouche said with a cold face, I will give you another 5 days. If nothing valuable can be found, the position of the operations captain can be changed. Yes, sir. I will do my best. Prosper had no choice but to accept the order with a grimace. Fouche saw the look on his face and knew that this mission was extremely difficult. The army had its own intelligence system, and even the secret police did not dare to extend its tentacles to the military, let alone the one that had only been established for a few months. The police station, remember, any contact will leave traces. He encouraged his men again. As long as you pay attention to all the details, I believe you will be able to find what you are looking for. In the office of the commander of the French Guard. You mean? Besonville stared directly at his men, trying to suppress his anger. That you were responsible for the shelling of the farmhouse in the southern suburbs? The major officer in front of him nodded with pride. Yes, General. Don't worry, they did it very cleanly. That night I sent someone to tell the peasant family that it was the cannon at the police training ground that hit them, and then notified all the newspapers in Paris. Theodore, you idiot. Besonville finally broke out, slamming the table hard and shouting, who let you make your own decisions? Yesterday, he heard about the incident at the farm in the southern suburbs. At that time, he really thought it was a training error at the police academy. He was overjoyed and contacted several influential nobles to put pressure on the Minister of the Interior. I didn't expect that it was actually done by my own subordinates. There are only a few armies near Paris. Besonville gritted his teeth. Others will soon suspect us. Listen. For a while, you and your people are not allowed to leave the military camp, nor are they allowed to have contact with outsiders. Oh, God, what a fool you have done. Yes, yes. Theodore shrank his neck in fear and retreated tremblingly. Besonville rubbed his swollen and sore palms and shook his head irritably. Although what Theodore did was rough, it was already dark at the time, so no one should have seen that it was the French guards who did it. As long as he hides in the military camp, nothing will go wrong. He glanced at the newspaper at hand. The huge headline read, suspected shells at the police academy training ground hit the farmhouse, killing 2 people. But he showed a sneer. As long as the matter is not leaked, maybe we can really take this opportunity to clean up the police station. At the entrance of the White Narcissus technique, 2 drunken middle-aged men put their arms around each other's shoulders and walked towards the carriage on the roadside. Valentin, my good friend, said the small-eyed man wearing a French Guard's uniform shirt and a long black coat with a smile on his face, patting the other person. Let's go hunting another day. In winter, the rabbit is so fat. The tall man with a square face waved his hand. What's the point of hunting? You can only use a short shotgun. His tongue seemed a little awkward. Cannon. Only cannon is a man's true love. Tiru, do you know that, if it weren't for my legs, maybe my military rank wouldn't be lower than yours? Tiru nodded repeatedly. Yes, your ancestors and fathers have all made military exploits. You have an excellent inheritance, and you will definitely become an excellent officer. Valentine limped out a few steps, looked back at the technical court behind him, and sighed. It's a pity that I can only waste my life in a place like this. I really envy you for being able to wear a military uniform, command the cannon and crush all enemies on the battlefield. And I, although I come from a military family, have never even touched a real cannon. Tiru smiled and said, cannon? What's the point of that? It's cold and hard. No, you are so blessed that you don't know how blessed you are. In my opinion, cannon is cuter than those girls from White Narcissus. Tiru suddenly felt something in his heart. The wealthy Viscount Valentin Menard had hit it off with him in the tavern a few days ago. In the past week or so, I have treated him to drinks and visits to the technical courts almost every day, and I have spent a lot of money. He was feeling a little sorry. I didn't expect Viscount Menard to like cannons so much, so maybe I can take this opportunity to return a favor to him. Theroux immediately got into the carriage and lowered his voice under the influence of alcohol. You have invited me to play with the white narcissus so many times, so I will invite you to play with the cannon, Menard immediately said in surprise. Really? Where are the cannons? Of course it's in the military camp. But I'm not a soldier. How can I enter the military camp? Theroux patted his chest. Don't worry, I'll take you there. You can use the cannon as you wish. If you have a chance, I can let you fire a few cannons. Oh, God. I don't know how to thank you, dear Theroux. We are friends. Why are we talking about this? At dusk, Menard changed into the uniform of the French Guard, limped behind Theroux, and entered the French Guard's barracks after the sentry at the camp gate caught a glimpse of Theroux's military rank. He didn't ask any questions outside the cannon warehouse of the French Guard. Theroux muttered a few words to the guarding officer, and then signaled to Menard that he could go in. Oh, God. They are really cannons. Menard immediately looked very interested when he saw those cannons. He almost touched the cannons one by one, as if he had met his beloved girl. Seeing his obsessed look, Theroux couldn't help but smile and shake his head. Then he sat down alone in the corner, took out the wine bottle, and drank. Menard saw that no one was watching nearby. The drunkenness on his face disappeared instantly, and he quickly took out a wooden ball slightly larger than his fist from his pocket. This was a strict replica of the cannonball that hit the farmhouse by the craftsman. Everything from the size to the dents on it is perfect. Menard placed the wooden balls one by one on the muzzles of the 6 4-pound cannons here and gestured. The muzzles of 3 of them basically matched the size of the cannonballs. He took out a long piece of paper from his pocket, with 2 parallel lines, some vertical marks and irregular circles drawn on it. He took the note and compared it with the wheels of the 3 guns, and quickly eliminated one of them, based on the wheel width. The note on the note was the wheel mark taken from the shelling site on the north side of the police academy training ground. The 2 parallel lines represent the width of the wheel, and the vertical bar above is the joint where the wheel is riveted. Irregular circles are signs of wear or bumps on the wheels. Menard carefully compared the remaining 2 cannons, suddenly smiled and whispered to himself, sure enough, any contact will leave traces. This trace is the one left by you. The cannon in front of him, from the width of the wheels, to the location of the rivets, to the small necks on the wheels, all matched the wheel marks at the scene. Menard quickly took out his pen and copied down the serial number on the tail of the cannon. Joseph flipped through the newspapers in front of him and nodded slightly. The front page of Paris Business Times is the Axel family feels deeply warmed by the care from the police department. Below is a print of Basankan holding Axel's little son and feeding him. Axel was the farmer whose house was hit by a shell that day. At that time, he took his 2 children to the fields to work on spring plowing, and he survived. The French courier followed up and reported on the current living conditions of the Axel family. The title was Little Benoit smiled for the first time. The house has been completely restored by the police station. The accompanying picture is a print of the Axel family's house. The Voice of the City conducted a more in-depth investigation. The front page headline was The Murderer May Be Someone Else. Experts say the range of the 4-pounder gun is limited. The content analyzed the extremely small possibility of firing a cannon from the police academy training ground to hit a farmhouse 1,800 steps away, and showed the artillery firing site discovered by Du Bois with the weapon of public opinion in hand. Joseph's crisis public relations this time was very successful. Now the direction of public opinion in Paris has changed to the police departments. Touching care for farmers or police department officials have no airs at all and treat ordinary people. People are very close. Even those who insist that it was the police academy training ground that accidentally attacked the farmhouse mostly hold the view that the police department has the courage to take responsibility and make up for its mistakes. Newspapers have reported that the Axel family received 4,000 livres in aid. This is definitely a huge sum of money for a farmer. Some surrounding farmers even complained in envy as to why their own homes were not hit by cannons. Axel also told reporters many times that he believed the rumors, and it was definitely not the shelling from the police academy that hit his home. And even if it was really an accidental artillery fire at the police academy training ground, my family has already forgiven the police academy, and the Paris police officers are like angels. As for those who protested outside the police academy training ground, all of them dispersed a week ago. After this incident of the police chief personally visiting farmers who suffered shelling, more young people signed up for the police academy than before. Joseph was reading an article about this matter in news and pictures when Eamon lightly knocked on the door and said, "Your Highness, Mr. Fouche is here." "Oh, invite him in." Fouche entered the office, first touched his chest and saluted, and then immediately said, "Your Highness, it is basically confirmed that it was the French guards who did it." As he spoke, he placed a report in front of Joseph and continued, "These are the details of the cannon that the people from the police intelligence department compared. The 7 gunners in charge of the cannon have also investigated, and 6 of them were involved in the incident. They all left the French guard station in the afternoon and returned at the same time that night, and it is certain that they did not go to Paris during this time. The police intelligence department has deployed a large number of informants in Paris, so he is fully confident in coming to this conclusion." Although the current French old-style army management is relatively lax, and each soldier has nearly 8 hours of free time every day, but so many people leave the military camp at the same time without going to Paris, there must be something wrong here. Joseph looked at the report and asked, "Is there any very tangible evidence?" Fouche shook his head. "Your Highness, we are currently using speculation to identify the murderer, but it is not enough to charge them." When Fouche saw the Crown Prince frowning, he immediately took 2 steps forward. His expression was cold, but his eyes were gleaming with excitement. "Your Highness, do you think we should arrest those people? I have many ways to make them admit it." Joseph glanced at him. "Where are those people now?" "In the camp of the French guards." "No. Take soldiers from the military camp. If you fail, the consequences will be very serious." Joseph looked at the report in his hand again, remembering the incident where Besonville wanted to enter the police academy training ground for inspection a while ago, and was forced to retreat by the police with guns. He couldn't help but sneer. "It seems that this is what he came for. I really didn't expect that. In order to fight against the police academy, Besonville would be able to kill people at will." If Axel had not been lucky enough to be at home at that time, all 6 members of the family might have been killed. If Besonville knew what Joseph was thinking, he would definitely scream injustice. He was a man with brains. He originally planned to use the power of the military aristocratic group to clean up the Paris police department, but he was not prepared to have a reckless man like Theodore under his command. Joseph threw the report on the table and took a deep breath. "Okay, you are playing tricks on me, right? Then I won't be polite. I tried my best to avoid mobilizing military power in the past because the political foundation was unstable, and I didn't want to alert the military aristocratic group. And now you are the one who has taken the initiative to provoke me, so if I slap you backhand, the military nobles will certainly not be able to say anything. In this case, I will accept this great gift from the French guard." Joseph lowered his head and thought for a moment, and suddenly thought that Besonville had used the excuse that an important person was visiting and needed to search the training ground. The important person coming to Paris recently should be the Princess of the Sicilies. He looked at Fouche and asked, "Do you know who is responsible for escorting foreign royal families when they visit Paris?" "Your Highness, generally the troops stationed in various places will escort you along the way. After arriving near Paris, the French guard will be in charge. When entering Paris, the French guard in the Forbidden Army will escort you until you reach the Palace of Versailles." Joseph nodded slightly. This was a good opportunity, and then he quickly sketched a plan in his mind. "Count Eamon, please prepare the carriage. I'm going to the Palace of Versailles." "Yes, Your Highness." Soon, the Crown Prince's motorcade drove out from the Industrial Planning Bureau. In the carriage, Joseph explained the next arrangements to Fouche. As he was talking, he heard a newspaper boy on the roadside shouting, "Read the newspaper. 2 sous a copy. The blood-knifed gangster is in Paris, around Paris, and there are already 7 or 8 people were killed." Joseph hurriedly ordered the car to stop and was about to ask someone to buy a newspaper. Fouche reported first, "Your Highness, that is a gang that blocks the road and robs." They don't even dare to enter the city of Paris. They only commit crimes in the countryside. They just kill people. There are quite a few, so it's getting attention. A gang that blocked the road and robbed you? Joseph couldn't help but smile. If you add this gang, it will be even more perfect. When the motorcade stopped at Versailles, Joseph immediately rushed to the Petit Trianon point. Queen Mary had not seen her son for more than half a month, and she immediately held him in her arms happily. "My dear Joseph, I thought you had forgotten me." Joseph chatted with her for a few words and suddenly said, "Mother, I want to go to the outskirts of Paris to greet Princess Maria Amelia in person. Thanks. 2. Cheyenne Wu, Honey Mountain, Jiangkoyan Low, Broken Wild Goose Calls the West Wind, Paladin 1996, Heart Like Floating Leaves, Sugar, and Grease don't come near. Several big guys for their generous rewards for this book. The young author is so grateful. HMM. Chapter 127. You can absolutely trust my loyalty. Queen Mary was startled when she heard this and secretly became nervous. Seeing her son's attitude being so positive, could it be that he had thoughts about the Princess of the Two Sicilies? Oh, by the way, I heard that Maria was also a very smart girl, good at astronomy and mathematics. Maybe it was these that attracted Joseph. She nodded reluctantly. Of course it's good, dear. It can make the Princess of the Two Sicilies feel our enthusiasm and courtesy. Then she immediately added, by the way, Clementine will be coming to Paris soon. Are you going too? Joseph immediately smiled and bowed. Of course, mother. How could I not greet my cousin who came from afar? Of course he doesn't care about welcoming the princess a few more times, and this can also cover up his attempt to set a trap for Bissonval by welcoming Maria. The queen was relieved. It was great. It turned out that her son only paid attention to etiquette and was not more interested in the Princess of the Two Sicilies. Clementine, you have to work hard and try to capture the heart of the crown prince. Joseph greeted the queen and immediately went to the chamberlain to discuss in detail the etiquette procedures for welcoming the Princess of the Two Sicilies and the arrangements along the way. Well, I think the roads here should be lined with colorful ribbons. Joseph pointed to the map and said, otherwise the bare trees will look too monotonous in winter. There are also these farmhouses, which the princess can see from a distance in the carriage. Just decorate it properly. Yes, your highness. I would like to follow your instructions. The chamberlain hurriedly wrote down these requests. He knew that the princess who came this time was not just for tourism, but was likely to become the crown prince's fiancée, so it was not surprising that his highness attached so much importance to her and wanted to make it grand. After Joseph finished discussing the ceremony to welcome the princess with the chamberlain, he did not return to Paris. Instead, he returned to the Dauphin's palace, where he had not lived for a long time. He walked slowly in front of a row of huge arched floor-to-ceiling windows. His eyes swept across the colorful halos reflected on the window glass, and suddenly turned his head and asked Kessaud, who was standing aside, Viscount Kessaud, will you be my captain of the guard? How long has it been? 7 or 8 years, right? Kessaud was a little surprised and immediately took a few steps closer and said, yes, it has been 8 years, your highness. I was fortunate enough to become your bodyguard when you were 4 years old. 2 years later, Her Majesty the Queen promoted me to captain. Joseph turned around. So, the person I can trust the most in this world, apart from the king and the queen, is you. Kessaud quickly raised his hat and bowed. By God, you can absolutely trust my loyalty, your highness. Joseph nodded, then looked at him seriously and said, Jax, my friend, I'm about to face a challenge, which will have a huge impact on me. I really need your help. Kessaud immediately stood up straight and said firmly, your highness, I will do anything for you, including sacrificing my life. Eastern suburbs of Paris. Beside the road leading to a nearby town, there is a small mound more than 10 meters high, with sparse shrubs growing on it. At this time, in the bushes, there were several men wearing greasy coarse cloth coats and equally dirty felt hats, with various weapons stuck on their waists or behind their backs. They were sitting on the ground carelessly, saying something, chatting without saying a word. It will be dark in another hour at most. A bald middle-aged man playing with an axe looked up at the sky and muttered dissatisfiedly, it seems like we have to wait in vain again today. Even If he doesn't come today, he will definitely come tomorrow. The red-haired man next to him rubbed his neck and looked under the mound. That's tens of thousands of livres. It's definitely worth waiting a few more days. The man sitting on the outermost side with a sinister look suddenly spoke. Colette, if we can't wait for that person within 3 days, I will beat your butt to pieces with the butt of my gun. The red-haired man trembled and said with an apologetic smile, boss, it has been spread all over the town that Baron Gideon has sold his house and all the land and is going to Paris to marry the widow. Oh, I saw Baron Gideon's servants loading boxes of luggage onto the carriage outside his yard. A strong man next to him with a prosthetic leg on his left hand, who looked a bit like Captain Hook, nodded immediately. That guy also posted a notice recruiting bodyguards in the town. It's obvious that he will leave in the next few days. Before he finished speaking, he heard a hurried whisper from the top of the mound. Hurry. That guy is coming. The few people who were extremely lazy just now suddenly jumped up from the ground. The sinister man signaled to his men, as I said before, do it. Yes, boss. Several people gathered around the road under the mound, while the man who weighed nearly 200 pounds and was responsible for looking out on the top of the mound pulled hard on the rope in his hand. Dozens of giant trees that had been prepared immediately rolled down, blocking the road more than 10 meters wide. The carriage that was moving leisurely suddenly came to a sudden stop. The two coachmen were so frightened that they jumped off their seats and fled towards the woods in the distance. The sinister man fired another shot at the carriage, led his men to surround the two carriages, and shouted proudly, Baron Gideon, we are just poor people. I hope you can generously leave some silver coins. Otherwise, we can only give you spend a few bucks and get the money yourself. He was about to open the door when he suddenly heard a gunshot behind him. He suddenly felt as if he had been hit by a giant hammer on his back, and he threw himself hard at the carriage. Then he saw that the carriage turned red. That was his blood. Several other gangsters were startled and turned around in a hurry. Unexpectedly, two pistols were stretched out from the carriage and pressed against the backs of Captain Hook and Bald Man. At the same time, several men with guns jumped out of the weeds on both sides of the road. The fat man's cry for mercy came from the top of the mound. Several gangsters turned around and saw a short man who looked like an ordinary farmer swinging a pistol and taking him down. Not long after, except for the dead leader, the other four gangsters had their weapons taken away and with guns pointed at their heads, they squatted fearfully in the open space beside the road. A carriage drove up in the distance and stopped next to a few people. Fouch opened the door and got out of the carriage. In order to capture these gangsters alive, he personally brought people to this small town and made up the story of Baron Gideon, and finally waited until the fish bit the hook. Fouch took out his pistol and played with it. He glanced at the gangsters with his dead fish eyes and hummed from his nose, well, the blood knife gang, right. The fat man who was on guard before was so frightened that he started crying. Let me go. I can tell you where the boss hides his money. The bald man glared at him, rubbed his neck and said, yes, we are the blood knife gang. We are unlucky if we are caught by the army. At this time in France, everyone agreed that only the army could deal with such vicious gangs as the blood knife gang, and the police were simply not enough. Prosper, who was holding a gun, shook his head and sneered. Who said we are an army? We are from the Lakeview gang. Fouch continued, we have a big deal to do recently, so we need some manpower. Several members of the blood knife gang were relieved when they heard this. It seemed that they would not be sent to the gallows, so they all looked up at Fouch. I'm willing to join the gang. I'll join in, too, and I Fouch snorted coldly. However, I only need 2 people. I have to see which of you is more capable. As he spoke, he dropped the 2 daggers on the ground, his eyes full of excitement and madness. The bald man and the red-haired man reacted the fastest. They immediately swooped down, grabbed the dagger from the ground, and stabbed it into the other 2 accomplices without hesitation. Southern suburbs of Paris. The trees on both sides of the road leading to the city were covered with colorful ribbons, as if there were beautiful corals growing there. In the distance, the sparse farmhouses are painted in beautiful white and gold, like treasure chests dotted among the corals on both sides of the moor. than 40-meter wide avenue between the coral and the treasure chest. A French guard soldier carrying a gun stood solemnly every 5 or 6 meters. The vigilance team extends from the outer suburbs to the city of Paris. The place has been under martial law since 2 days ago, but Bissonville still took the trouble to personally lead the officers to inspect the more than 4 miles of road over and over again. Tomorrow the Princess of the Two Sicilies will here we are, and according to the arrangements of the Palace of Versailles, the Crown Prince is also here to greet the Princess, so there must be no mistakes at this moment. A group of craftsmen carrying paints and brushes, led by French guard soldiers, walk towards a farmhouse on the east side. Bissonville casually asked the officer beside him, "Who are those people?" The latter hurriedly said, "General, they are craftsmen of the Palace of Versailles. They have strictly checked the documents and there is no problem. They always like to say that here or there is not perfect enough, and make decorations everywhere. In my opinion, they just want to be able to get more, just greedy for some funds." Bissonville nodded and said with a straight face, "Don't be careless. Keep an eye on everyone." "Yes, General." As they were talking, they saw several officers approaching with 20 or 30 soldiers in uniforms that were obviously more majestic and straighter than the French guards' force. Bissonville frowned, and when he got closer, he could see the appearance of the person clearly. He quickly put on a smile and raised his hat to say hello. "Viscount Cassard, why do you have time to come here?" Cassard sat on the horse and raised his hat in return. "Nice to see you, General Bissonville. You know, I can't make any mistakes in an occasion like tomorrow, so I have to familiarize myself with the environment in advance." "Who says it's not?" Bissonville smiled. "Look, I've been here more than a dozen times today." Cassard looked at the wasteland on both sides of the road. "Oh, I'll go over there and take a look. You can continue to do your work. After the incident of welcoming the princess is over, I'll treat you to a drink. Ha, I look forward to your invitation." The two of them passed each other, and Cassard seemed to be very serious. He took the people to look at both sides of the road carefully several times. The officer next to Bissonville glanced at Cassard's back and said disdainfully, "Ha, just pretending. There are our people everywhere here. What's there to see?" Bissonville waved his hand indifferently. "The Crown Prince is coming here, and it is normal for his guards to do routine inspections." On the other side, Cassard's team passed by a bush, and at the same time, 7 or 8 palace painters came towards them. When Cassard saw the appearance of the leading painter, he hurriedly reined in his horse and signaled behind him. A healthy soldier with a high nose immediately nodded to him and pulled the other 2 people into the bushes. Cassard's team stopped on the spot, completely covering the 3 people's figures. The soldier with a high nose and his 2 subordinates took off their military uniforms very neatly, revealing the painter's clothes they had already worn underneath, with a few traces of paint on them. The 3 men stuffed their clothes into the empty paint buckets, handed the weapons to the soldiers behind Cassard, then picked up the paint buckets and followed the painters as if no one else was around, and walked away. On Cassard's side, it was as if nothing happened. He circled the area a few times and then returned the same way. No officer or soldier of the French guard noticed that 3 men were missing from the more than 20-some members of the Crown Prince's personal guard. The painters walked happily towards a farmhouse not far away. In the team, a red-haired man looked around nervously and asked in a low voice the painter with a high nose next to him, "Boss, why are there so many soldiers? What are we going to do? Is it dangerous?" The tall-nosed man smiled relaxedly. "You have just arrived, so you don't know the strength of our Lacu gang. Let me tell you, half of the soldiers around are ours," he said, waving to a soldier in the distance. The latter waved his hand perfunctorily and responded with a smile. "These craftsmen are all from the Palace of Versailles, and who knows which big shot they will work for, so the soldiers at the bottom are very polite to them, based on the principle of not offending them if they can." "You are really one of our own," the middle-aged painter beside him exclaimed. "If you take off his felt hat, you will find that he is actually bald. Yes, this man and the red-haired man are the surviving members of the Blood Knife gang. The tall-nosed man who led them was Cassard's confidant named Odlick. The matter was so important that Joseph did not even involve Fouche After the latter caught the members of the blood knife gang, they handed them over to Kesaud, and all subsequent matters were presided over by Kesaud. The red-haired man was still uneasy. "Boss, what are we going to do this time?" Odalik answered according to the script. "Robbery. Tomorrow a noble will pass by with several carts of gold, which is discount bank money. They have some relations with the military and have hired these soldiers to be bodyguards. But how did he know that there is a big shot behind our boss, who has already packed our people into the army? As you all saw just now, no one came to question us at all." He continued to encourage the two gangsters, "and our mission is just to show off in the distance. When we grab the gold, we will hide in the woods behind there. There is no risk, and we will get at least 7 or 8,000 livres by then." While talking, the painters had arrived at the farmhouse. The owner of the house had long been invited by the French guards to go elsewhere, leaving only one soldier to guard here. The painters greeted the guards and spread out to work. Odlik took his 2 younger brothers and casually entered the attic and hid in a wooden cabinet. Chapter 128. I'm walking on thin ice in this life. More than 40 minutes later, the leading painter looked at the newly decorated farmhouse, nodded with satisfaction, and waved his men to leave. The soldier guarding the room did not notice that he had an extra paint bucket in his hand, and that his long-handled brush was missing. Naturally, the paint bucket contained the military uniforms of Adalik's 2 younger brothers and the craftsman's clothing of the 3 of them. While the long-handled brush was left in the attic. As the painters left the area, an officer of the French guard stopped them again, checked their credentials, and counted their heads. "There were 8 people when we arrived, and there were still 8 people when we left." "No problem at all." The officer nodded and let his men go. No matter how meticulous his investigation was, he would never be able to check the status of the painters with the soldiers guarding each farmhouse. Early the next morning, the sun shone slantingly on the broad avenues outside Paris, and the air was so warm that it almost didn't feel like winter. Several exquisitely crafted white carriages, surrounded by more than a dozen cavalrymen, drove slowly from the south. In the middle carriage, Princess Louise Maria of the Sicilies looked nervously out of the window with her big beautiful eyes. Before arriving in Paris, she was deeply shocked. The King's Avenue was incredibly spacious, and the houses on both sides of the road were more exquisite and beautiful than the other. It seemed that all the nobles lived around Paris. Note 1. However, what made her most nervous was the French crown prince whom she was about to meet, who was known as the son of the gods. It is said that he is just 14 years old this year, 1 year younger than himself, but he has already completed courses at the University of Paris, successfully presided over the reform of the Paris police force, and is now even serving as the assistant to the French finance minister. This simply cannot be described as genius. She is also studying college mathematics and knows how difficult those things are. She also understands how troublesome national government affairs are. How did he do it? Moreover, it is said that the crown prince also inherited the appearance of his mother. He is very handsome, with slightly curly blonde hair, starry blue eyes and a face with perfect proportions like an ancient Greek statue. The girls at Versailles would be excited for months if they could just say a word to him. When Princess Maria thought that such an outstanding crown prince might become her fiancé, her heart suddenly started beating wildly. Just as she was thinking wildly, the carriage suddenly stopped slowly. Sitting opposite her, Timothy, the ambassador of the Sicilies to France, quickly reminded him in a low voice, "Your Highness, it should be His Royal Highness the Dauphin who is here to greet you, Princess." Maria quickly gathered her thoughts, lowered her head to check her clothes, then straightened her back, and showed a polite and dignified smile. Timothy got out of the car first, and opened the door. Maria got off the carriage along the wooden steps, and walked through the crowd of respectful attendants. When she raised her eyes, she suddenly saw a handsome young man wearing a dark blue thick velvet jacket, white trousers, and a 3-cornered hat, looking at her with a smile. The elegant arcs on her face and her mesmerizing eyes made her mind go blank for half a second. She could swear that the person who described the crown prince's appearance to her could not describe even 1/10 of his handsomeness. Maria stepped forward in a daze, not daring to look directly into the crown prince's eyes. She hurriedly picked up the hem of her skirt, bowed seriously, and said in a low voice, "I'm glad to see you, Your Highness the Crown Prince. You can come so far. It's a great honor." to pick me up at the place where you are." Joseph smiled and stroked his chest in return. "This is what I should do, your beautiful princess. Welcome to Paris." In accordance with traditional etiquette, he hugged the princess cheek to cheek. "Well, the waist is very thin, the skin is delicate and smooth, and the chest, cough." Joseph was busy in his mind and interrupted his thoughts. She was only a 15-year-old girl. What was she thinking? After the ceremony, he took 2 steps back and gestured towards the princess's carriage. "Your Royal Highness, I will lead you from the front. Their Majesties the King and Queen have hosted a banquet at the Palace of Versailles and are waiting for you." After being polite again, Joseph turned back to his car and ordered the convoy to return to Versailles. Maria was a little disappointed when she saw that he didn't invite her to ride in the same car. She suddenly remembered that she had a competitor, the Grand Duchess of Tuscany. Clementine. Drums and trumpets sounded all around, which was the signal for the motorcade to set off. She hurriedly got into her carriage, feeling melancholy in her heart. Could it be that His Royal Highness the Crown Prince likes Clementine more? I don't know if I can compete with her in the farmhouse a mile away from where Joseph greeted Princess Maria. Odalik vaguely heard the sound of the trombone and immediately needed his sore arms and legs. He and his 2 younger brothers were fully settled here all night. After a moment, Odalik, dressed as a farmer, carefully got out of the cabinet and looked down at the attic. He immediately saw the soldier guarding the place leaning on the door frame and falling asleep. He picked up the short stick that had been prepared under the bed, tiptoed down to the attic, and accurately hit the soldier on the head. The latter fainted immediately. Dalek then pulled out a short knife, threw it to the bald man who followed him, and made a cutting motion towards the soldier, who fell to the ground. Baldhead immediately stabbed the soldier to death without hesitation, and then dragged the body into the house. Killing him was as easy as drinking a glass of wine. Odalik returned to the attic, pulled out a long-handled brush from under the bed, and removed the cloth wrapped around the brush handle to reveal the gun barrel inside. Then, he removed the bulging brush head and found a wooden gun, but inside. Soon, a British-made Brown Bess 1742 flintlock gun appeared in his hand. He found gunpowder and lead bullets from the other end of the brush handle, loaded them neatly into the muzzle of the gun, gave the musket to the red-haired subordinate, and ordered, "When the gold carriage comes here later, you can go there while shooting." The red-haired man looked at the road in the distance and wondered. "Boss, I'm afraid I can't hit you from such a distance, idiot. We are just showing off. Letting you shoot is to remind us that we can take action." As Odalik spoke, he leaned over and took out a French carbine with a but cut off from under the bed. It was brought in by the painter in a bucket. He also loaded the ammunition and handed it to the bald man. "You can also fire the gun together. Leave it to us, boss." When the 2 gangsters thought that they could get 7 or 8,000 livres by firing 2 shots at will, they were both very happy to join the Lakeview gang. Then, Odalik picked up the Cholville flintlock of the soldier who had just died, and then found the gunpowder and bullets from the body. Then he checked the barrel of the gun and found that it had been loaded with ammunition, and took the trouble to pour out the gunpowder. Reload again. Beside the attic window of the farmhouse, a white carriage appeared in a Doric's telescope. He knew the driver of the car very well. They were all members of His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, whom he met often. Odalik immediately asked his 2 men to come to the window, while he stepped back a few steps and shouted, "Shoot!" The 2 gangsters were still immersed in the reverie that the Lakeview gang had taken control of the situation, and immediately opened fire on the distant carriage without hesitation. 2 roars suddenly erupted in the silent outer suburbs of Paris, frightening the birds in the forest nearby to fly into the air. The nearby French guards, from officers to soldiers, felt as if they had been slapped in the mouth, and immediately looked around in panic to determine the source of the gunfire. Bissonville's face turned pale, and veins popped out on his forehead. He turned around and shouted at the herald at the top of his lungs, "Sound the horn! Sound the horn quickly! Make the Crown Prince's motorcade turn around!" "What are you doing standing still? Protect the Crown Prince and Her Royal Highness the Princess! Hurry, Balthazar, Cronet, let the people with you search for me." As he said, he also pulled out his pistol and glanced back and forth. "Who is so bold?" The officers of the French guards had begun to direct the soldiers to shoot indiscriminately in the direction of the gunshots in an attempt to suppress the firepower of those who had evil intentions in the farmhouse. The bald man heard the gunshots one after another. He thought it was his own people who had started to take action. He turned around and asked Odlik in a flattering manner, "Boss, do you think this is okay?" The latter smiled indifferently and pulled him to the middle of the attic. He stood in the direction of the window, and the Cholville flintlock gun in his hand suddenly spurted out tongues of flame. A bloody hole suddenly appeared on the defenseless bald chest. The whole person was knocked backwards by the huge thrust of the projectile, and he died without even struggling. Odlik had previously deliberately reduced the amount of gunpowder, so the body that was shot was not shattered, and it was difficult to tell that he was shot at close range. The red-haired man by the window was stunned by this scene for a moment, but a Dalek hit him in the stomach with the butt of his gun without hesitation, and took advantage of his bending opportunity to hit him hard in the back of the head. Ignoring the crackling gunfire outside, Odlik calmly loaded Cholville's ammunition, then dragged the unconscious red-haired man to the pillar of the attic, stepped back a few steps, and shot him in the throat. After doing this, Odlik looked around the room and found nothing missing. He immediately grabbed the remains of the long-handled brush that he had packed up before, returned Cholville's to the dead French guardsman, and ran away from the back door of the farmhouse. Arriving at the grove dozens of steps away, he put on the clothes of the Crown Prince's guards as quickly as possible, hurriedly buried the remains of the long-handled brush, squatted behind a tree, and began to wait nervously. At the same time as the first gunshot was fired, Cassoud reined in the army horse, waved his hand and shouted loudly, "Don't mess up." Everyone gathered near the Crown Prince and Princess's car, beware of a sneak attack. The French guards were already in a state of confusion. They immediately followed the instructions and more than 100 people surrounded the carriage of Joseph and the Princess of the Two Sicilies. When the third gunshot was fired from the direction of the farmhouse, Quesold winked at his officers and shouted loudly, "Clermont, over there. Take someone to catch the assassin." "Yes." Clermont pulled the reins of his horse and waved, "Team 3, follow me." Immediately, under the shocked and admiring eyes of the French guard officers and soldiers, more than 20 of the Crown Prince's personal guards rushed towards the farmhouse in the distance. On Basonville's side, it wasn't until the fourth gunshot was heard in the distance that he finally determined the exact location of the attacker. He immediately pointed his pistol at the farmhouse. "Over there. Adrien, bring someone over there." "Yes, Clermont." And the three teams seemed to have lost track of the direction. They first ran diagonally towards the woods not far from the farmhouse. After making a small circle, they turned around, as if they had a sudden realization, and rushed towards the farmhouse again. The moment they passed by the edge of the forest, a Dalek rushed over in a few steps, took the flintlock handed by his teammates, put it on his shoulders, and integrated into the team. In fact, the wasteland in the suburbs at this time was filled with gunpowder smoke due to continuous musket fire. Even if he ran directly back to Joseph, it is estimated that no one from the French guard would be able to see him. Clermont deliberately let his men slow down and waited for the French guards to take the lead in surrounding the farmhouse. Then he pretended to be in a hurry and followed them. Adrien, an officer of the French guard, was hesitating whether to rush in directly or suppress the fire first when he heard Clermont shout, "Cowards! Do you want to wait for them to shoot at His Royal Highness the Crown Prince?" Adrien was so excited that he quickly drew out his sword and waved towards the farmhouse. "Charge in! Catch the assassin!" The French guards immediately rushed forward and first saw the soldier guarding the farmhouse dead on the ground. Someone nervously fired a shot into the attic and then climbed the stairs cautiously. On the other side, after Joseph heard the gunshot, he immediately locked the door of the carriage from the inside. This is very reasonable. If someone is attacked, he must first prevent the assassin from rushing into the carriage. Then, he and Demon quickly removed the wax seals on the carriage doors, walls, wooden tables, etc., and put all the wax blocks into their pockets. Demon took out a paper bag from under the seat, threw the wood fragments inside into the car, and finally inserted a flat-end lead bullet into the damaged part of the wall on the other side of the carriage. At this time, the carriage appeared to have two holes, one in the door and the other in the wooden table. There was a lead bullet embedded in the wall of the car on the other side, and splinters of wood were everywhere in the car apparently. A bullet had just hit the carriage point then. Joseph stretched out his arm to Emming and gave him a confirming look. "Come on." The latter drew a dagger from his calf and said in a deep voice, "Your Highness, I'm sorry." As he spoke, his sword flashed, and a blood stain appeared on Joseph's right upper arm. He immediately felt a sharp pain. Emmon put away his sword, picked up a sharp-looking piece of wood in the carriage, took out a sheep tripe filled with chicken blood from his pocket, and stabbed it gently. The chicken blood immediately stained the wood splinter, and it looked like the splinter had cut Joseph's arm. When it flew apart, Emmon sprinkled some more blood in the carriage, put away the sheep's belly, and then shouted out of the carriage in an extremely anxious tone, "Oh, God! The Crown Prince has been shot. Doctor! Call the doctor quickly." The heartbreaking shouts floated hundreds of meters away. Everyone who heard them was struck by lightning and stood stunned on the spot, especially Basonville, who only felt a buzzing in his head and almost fell off his horse. "Come down." In the carriage following the princess, Princess Maria heard that the Crown Prince had been shot. She was so frightened that her face turned pale and tears burst out of her eyes. Note 1. King's Avenue refers to a specially widened road funded by the French government, equivalent to the highway in the 18th century. Thanks to Zhenxianqias and Guanzai Daotang for their generous rewards for this book. The young author is grateful. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 129 Oscar-winning acting skills. Virgin Mary. Why did such a terrible thing happen? The Princess of the Two Sicilies covered her mouth and wanted to check the situation outside the window, but she was too scared to raise her head. She just huddled in the corner of the seat and kept crying, "Your Highness, the Crown Prince came to pick me up. Those who were attacked all blamed me. Woo woo, it's all my fault, Ambassador." Timothy glanced out the window warily, pulled down the curtains with a swish, then handed the handkerchief to the princess and whispered anxiously, "Your Highness, calm down. This matter has nothing to do with you." With a handkerchief to wipe away her tears, Maria cried harder. "What should I do if something happens to His Royal Highness the Crown Prince?" "No, it won't be," Timothy hurriedly advised. "I heard that the gunfire was very far away. Even if it hit the Crown Prince, it shouldn't be fatal." "Really?" Maria recalled the physics knowledge she had learned, nodded slightly, and her cry gradually turned into sobs. "May God bless the Crown Prince." Then, another thought popped up in her head. She had just arrived in Paris and caused the Crown Prince to be attacked. Would this make him have a bad impression of her? Will Her Majesty the Queen be angry with herself for this? Maybe he will be immediately driven back to the Two Sicilies. Thinking of this, she suddenly started sobbing again. At this time, 200 to 300 people gathered around Joseph's carriage. The shouts of people, the neighing of horses, and the sound of gunfire from time to time turned the scene into a mess. Since the court physician did not come with him, no one expected that a doctor would be needed to welcome a blind date. The French guard's doctor was brought over on horseback by an officer. The officer threw the doctor off his horse, pointed at the Crown Prince's carriage and shouted anxiously, "That's the one, hurry." The military doctor hurriedly got into the car, looked at Emming and asked, "Where is the injury?" "I don't know." The latter looked panicked. The military doctor is already praying in his heart, but he must not let His Royal Highness the Crown Prince die in his own hands. Outside the carriage, Basonville also urged his horse to come over. Looking at the chaotic scene around him, he wanted the Crown Prince's carriage to turn around to avoid danger, but he was also worried that it would delay his healing. He was so anxious that he didn't know what to do. In the farmhouse not far away, a lieutenant officer of the French guard rushed up to the attic first, but only saw 2 bodies on the ground. He immediately ordered his men to disperse and search. Soon, the soldiers returned and reported finding no one else. The lieutenant confirmed it personally before reporting the situation to Adrien, who was waiting outside. The latter hurriedly ordered the herald to summon him, saying that the attacker had been killed. As a trumpet sound with a unique rhythm sounded, the French guards gradually stopped blindly shooting and began to form a team under the command of the officer. When Bisonville learned that the attacker had been caught, he quickly ordered the carriage of the crown prince and princess to return to the Palace of Versailles immediately. He himself led more than 200 cavalrymen, escorting them all the way with a solemn expression. In the Palace of Versailles, Queen Mary, who was all dressed up, was humming a tune and admiring the newly made wig on her head in front of the mirror when she saw Countess de Bernenac trotting in with a pale face. Queen Mary was about to ask the maid why she was so rude today, but she heard the latter say urgently, "Your Majesty, His Royal Highness the Crown Prince's motorcade was attacked halfway. It is said His Highness was injured." Queen Mary stared, stunned for a second, then suddenly tilted her body and fainted. After a long time, the queen was finally awakened by the foul smell of the smelling salts in the doctor's hands. She pushed the doctor's hand away hard and looked for de Bernenac among the servants around her. "Where is Joseph? How is he?" The maid hurriedly came over to support her and said softly, "Your Majesty, the latest news is that His Highness's life is not in danger. The military doctor of the guard has treated his wound. He should arrive at the Palace of Versailles in 2 hours." "Ah, you sure? It's not life-threatening?" Queen Mary ignored the crooked wig on her head and grabbed the maid's hand, staring at her without blinking. "Yes, God bless. Amen." The queen made the sign of the cross on her chest, took a few deep breaths, then struggled to stand up, supported by others, and walked towards the square of the Palace of Versailles on her legs and feet, and at the same time shouted loudly, "Let Dr. Grousset go to Paris quickly and treat the crown prince on the way." On the side, Countess de Bernenac said, "Your Majesty, the doctors have already gone." "Okay, that's good." 2 hours later, a large group of cavalry drove into the Palace of Versailles with 2 carriages. The nobles who were originally waiting here to welcome the Princess of the Sicilies were now concerned about the condition of the crown prince. There were even many young girls who were so worried that something happened to their highness that they kept wiping tears. Queen Mary, who had taken off her wig, shook off Countess de Bernenac's supporting hand and ran towards the carriage. Louis XVI also followed behind with a heavy expression. The cavalry immediately moved out of the way. The queen saw the bullet holes in the car door through the gap between the soldiers, and her heart immediately tightened. When she opened the car door, she suddenly felt dizzy. The car was in a mess, with sawdust and blood everywhere. The son was leaning on the seat, his body covered in blood, especially his right arm. Although he had been briefly bandaged, his entire arm was almost soaked in blood. Of course, she couldn't possibly know that most of the food here was chicken blood. As soon as her trembling lips uttered a word, tears flowed out. Behind her, Louis XVI stared at his son, his eyes also red. Dr. Grousset got out of the car first, bowed to the Queen and King, and then comforted, "Your Majesty, please don't worry. Your Highness is only injured, and his life is not in danger. He should be frightened now, and needs to rest, as soon as possible." "Rest? Oh, okay. The Queen nodded subconsciously, and told Countess de Bernenac, "Quickly, send the Crown Prince back to rest." Joseph was weakly helped out of the car, then lay on a stretcher, and returned to his palace. The King, Queen, and all the nobles immediately followed. Joseph lay on the bed, looking very weak, closing his eyes, and pretending to sleep. The Queen sat on the edge of the bed, lowered her head, and rubbed the thick hemostatic bandage on her son's arm. It was the military doctor who wrapped it on him for more than a dozen layers at Joseph's repeated request. She wiped away her tears, adjusted her breathing, and turned to look at the group of people around her. Her voice was full of chill. "Who can explain to me why things turned out like this?" Quesode immediately looked at Bisonville, who was standing at the door of the palace with a pale face. Following his lead, the others also looked at the French guard commander. Under the gaze of everyone, Bisonville moved to the middle of the room with difficulty, saluted the King and Queen, and said stumblingly, "Your Majesty, it was someone shot and attacked in the middle." Queen Mary glanced at him. "How did the attacker get close?" "I don't know yet, not sure." The Queen frowned. "How many people in the French guard are on guard duty?" 3,000 people, Your Majesty." Queen Mary stood up suddenly, stared at Bisonville, her eyes full of anger, and shouted, 3,000 people? What on earth are you doing?" Didn't you find anyone attacking? Yes, yes. Bissonville's head almost dropped to his crotch, and he muttered, "It was my negligence." Louis XVI stood up and gently patted his wife on the shoulder. Queen Mary glared at Bissonville and ignored him. She looked at the doctor to confirm her son's condition again, and then turned to look at the officials who came to visit. "Count Robert, Baron Vermorel, please start investigating immediately. I want to know what happened today." "Yes, Your Majesty." The head of the secret police and the second captain of the Queen's personal guard bowed to take orders at the same time. For the next time, Louis XVI and Queen Mary stayed at the Dauphin's bedside and did not even eat lunch. It was not until dusk that Joseph finally woke up slowly. The Queen immediately grabbed her son's left hand and said softly, "My dear, you finally woke up. How do you feel?" "God bless." Louis XVI also looked at his son with extremely concerned eyes. Joseph showed the panic and helplessness that a 14-year-old boy should have at the right time. He looked at his parents pitifully and frowned. "I feel very weak. The wound hurts so much." The Queen almost cried out of distress again and quickly comforted her softly. "The Lord will bless you, my dear. You will be fine." Louis XVI looked at the doctor aside with searching eyes. The latter came over helplessly and said, "Your Majesty, His Royal Highness the Crown Prince's wound has been carefully treated, and now he can only rest. As for the pain, perhaps His Highness can take some Dover powder." Joseph's eyelids twitched when he heard this. Dover's powder is a commonly used analgesic made from corn millet. "It is not a good thing." He quickly changed the subject and said to the Queen in horror, "Mother, that bullet flew between me and Count Eamon. If it had been half a foot away, it would have hit my heart." The Queen and Shirley were both frightened when they heard this, and they comforted their son again and again. Eamon added another kill from the side. "Your Majesty, although the bullet did not hit His Highness at that time, the wood fragments flying from the car were also very dangerous. You see, His Highness's wound was caused by the wood fragments fired. Fortunately, God has blessed us. Otherwise, if a piece of wood had hit His Highness's eyes, the consequences would have been terrible." Joseph's master and servant looked at each other without leaving any trace and praised each other's acting skills. It was not until late at night that Queen Mary and Louis XVI left the Dauphin's palace, still in shock. At 10 o'clock the next morning, all cabinet ministers were summoned to the conference hall. I saw several sketches placed in front of the Queen. Count Robert was telling her about the investigation of yesterday's attack. "That was a British-made 1742 style flintlock bullet." Robert pointed to the sketch of the interior of the carriage. "It entered through the door and was finally blocked by the pillar on the other side of the carriage. Judging from the power of penetration, it should have been shot from somewhere farther away. Anyone who investigates will definitely come to this conclusion. Because the marks on the carriage were shot by Cursoud himself with a 1742 flintlock gun. In order to make the power more suitable, he carefully adjusted the amount of gunpowder. Subsequently, the damaged areas in the door and compartment were sealed with wax and painted so that they were difficult to see from the outside. When the attacker's gunfire rang out, Joseph peeled off the wax seal and put the bullets and pieces of wood he had collected before restoring the scene of the shooting." "What is the identity of the perpetrator?" Brian asked with a frown. "They are two gangsters." Robert gestured towards the sketch of the murderer's body. "It's called the Blood Knife Gang. They have committed many crimes recently, blocking roads and robbing and killing 7 or 8 people." Baron Vermorel, captain of the Queen's Guard, added at the side, "Your Majesty, we have compared the wanted posters in detail and asked the police in the town of Moratraun to identify him. We are sure that he is a gangster." Baron Breteuil, the Minister of Justice, was very puzzled. "How did they get close to the convoy?" Robert pointed at the map and said, "He should have slipped over from the farmland to the east and then took advantage of the French Guard soldiers' negligence and ran into the farmhouse." He and Vermorel were confused before. The farmland was more than 300 steps away from the farmhouse, and there were at least 10 French Guard soldiers around who could see their point. They talked for a long time, and in the end they could only attribute it to Bissonville's negligence, such as loopholes in the patrol arrangement, or lax control, and the soldiers were lazy and slept. No one would have thought that the attacker was the one who was brought to the scene by someone who was The biggest victim. Robert continued to report the results of the investigation. Then the two men killed the soldiers guarding the farmhouse and hid in the attic. When the motorcade passed by, they shot His Highness the Crown Prince with guns. The French guards heard the shots and opened fire on the attic, killing the attackers on the spot. Baron Vermorel continued, "We have compared the gun bullets, and the conclusion is completely consistent." The Minister of Justice thought, "Why do these two guys want to assassinate His Highness? HMPH, someone must have paid a lot of money to hire them." Munard snorted coldly, "There are too many conspirators who want to ruin the future of France." Brian pondered, "Or, they wanted to assassinate Princess Maria, but the distance was too far and the bullets missed. If it is true as he said, then the murderer's purpose is to provoke a war between the two countries. But no matter what, the consequences of this attack are extremely serious." Queen Mary closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and said, "It seems that what happened is very clear. Count Robert, please continue to investigate the person behind the scenes." She looked at Breteuil again. "I want to know now, as the French guards responsible for protecting the Dauphin's motorcade, especially Bissonville, what kind of punishment will they receive?" Breteuil thought for a while and said after careful consideration, "Your Majesty, I think General Bissonville has committed serious dereliction of duty and should be dismissed and exiled. Thanks to ATPX4869 Guy for generously tipping this book. The young author is grateful." Chapter 130. The Great Purge begins. Queen Mary stared at the sketch in front of her, her face grimacing with great dissatisfaction. "Is the punishment so light, Justice?" Minister Breteuil nodded helplessly. "Your Majesty, according to relevant laws, this is the heaviest punishment for General Bissonville, unless there is evidence to prove that he deliberately let the gangsters get close to His Highness. This is the current French law, which is very tolerant to the nobility. More than 10 years ago, Countess de la Motte, Jean, claimed to be Queen Mary's maid and found a concubine to pretend to be the queen and deceived Archbishop Rohan into buying a necklace worth 2 million livres for the queen. Jean then handed the necklace to Count de la Motte and sold it in England. It was not until the jeweler complained to the queen that the installment payment failed to arrive that the matter was revealed. Archbishop Rohan took out the Queen's autographed letter in public to prove his innocence, but the Queen became everyone's talking point. Even in such a serious case, Rohan and Count de la Motte were acquitted, while Jean was only sentenced to the Bastille because of her noble status. And the next year she escaped from prison. Some suspected that the Duke of Orleans helped her escape. Therefore, in Bissonville's situation, being sentenced to exile is really the limit. Queen Mary looked at Brian, Mono and others, and saw that they also nodded, so she could only pinch her eyebrows and said, "Okay, then exile. But the place of exile? I remember we have a small island in East Africa. What is it called?" Cassaud, who was called as a witness, immediately answered, "It's Seychelles, Your Majesty." "Yes, Seychelles." The Queen nodded bitterly and looked at Breteuil. "That's where Bissonville will be exiled." The Seychelles is 10,000 nautical miles from Paris, and with the sailing technology of the 18th century, there was no guarantee that anyone would even make it there alive from France. Although Bissonville has not yet been sent to trial, since the Queen has settled on Seychelles, she basically has not escaped. In the conference hall, no one, including the military ministers, dared to speak for Bissonville, not to mention the anger of the King and Queen. Yesterday's attack was really too serious. And there happened to be a foreign princess present and witnessed everything, which was so embarrassing. Baron Breteuil glanced at the Queen's expression and continued, "Your Majesty, as for the other members of the French Guard, they all bear important responsibility for failing to stop the attacker, since it is still unclear how the two gangsters approached the Crown Prince's car. All officers and soldiers of the French Guard need to be isolated and reviewed. After that, the suspects will be handed over to the military court for prosecution and trial, examination." The Queen waved her hand tiredly. "Baron Breteuil, please work with Vermorel to assist the military police department in examining the officers and soldiers of the French Guard. All officers are suspended and no one is allowed to leave the barracks until their innocence is proven, please." Report the results of the investigation to me at any time. Yes, Your Majesty. Saint Priest, the Minister of War, breathed a sigh of relief when he heard this. Bersonville was definitely finished, but as long as the military police and the military court were responsible for the matter, the other officers in the French Guard should be saved. After all, they are all members of the military system. They just go through the motions and announce that they are not involved in this matter as France's elite force and stationed in Paris. Most of the officers of the French Guard have some background in the military aristocratic group. Everyone's interests are entangled with each other. These people have a very wide network of connections. Among other things, the commander of a cavalry battalion of the French Guard was the brother-in-law of Saint Priest's cousin. If the Queen directly sends someone from the royal family to review the matter, he will be in great trouble. Just when he thought that the matter was over, he saw Quessaud bowing to the Queen and saying, "Your Majesty, I think that with the ability shown by the French Guards, they are no longer suitable to continue to guard Paris. Perhaps Paris should be replaced by another one. Form a more reliable force to ensure its safety." The Queen nodded with deep understanding and looked at the other ministers. "What do you think, Saint?" Priest lowered his head and said nothing. Interior Minister Monod forced out an honest smile and said, "Your Majesty, the entire French Guard is now under review and cannot fulfill its duty to protect Paris. Other troops should indeed be deployed to ensure the defense of Paris." Last night, Joseph sent someone to inform him and asked him to cooperate with Quessaud. Brian also nodded and said, "Your Majesty, there is no war on the border of southern Netherlands now. It is a waste to have elite troops like the Flanders Brigade staying there, and they can just be transferred to help defend Paris." Baron Bretteville's eyes suddenly lit up when he heard this, and he echoed loudly, "Your Majesty, I also think that the Flanders Brigade is very suitable." Like him, the commanders of the Flanders Brigade were a very rare group of nobles who firmly supported the king. Transferring them to Paris would be of great benefit to strengthening his political power. The Secretary of State for Household Registration is in Birmingham as he puts the ceremonial finishing touches to the Anglo-French trade negotiations. The Foreign Secretary had just reached Austria on his return trip from Russia. So there was no objection from anyone in the chamber at this time. Seeing this, Queen Mary immediately made the decision, then called the Flanders Brigade to Paris. The French Guard's location will be changed to the town of Moratroin. She still vividly remembered the town as the base of the Blood Knife Gang, and she happened to drop the French Guard there. An hour later, in the garden of the Palace of Versailles, the Duke of Orleans was smiling to the Marquis de Saint Priest. "Therefore, it is not appropriate for me to contact the military police at the moment, and I have to ask you to convey the message on my behalf. Who could have expected such an attack by bandits? Louis XV was assassinated before. We cannot let innocent officers be implicated." The French Guard was his territory that he had managed for many years, especially the officers. He had probably invested more than $1 million in it, so naturally he could not watch them be dismissed or exiled. The Minister of War nodded confidently. "Please rest assured, with this activity funding, the military police will definitely be lenient. Even if someone is really prosecuted, I will handle it in the military court." The Duke of Orleans had just promised him a total of 250,000 livres, and he estimated that he could get at least half of it. After all, the officers of the French Guard also served as military police, so there was no need to do it all by himself. The Duke of Orleans did not catch up with the previous meeting, so he breathed a sigh of relief and bowed to indicate, "Then I'll help you." In the Crown Prince's palace, dozens of noble girls were looking worriedly at the seriously injured Crown Prince. They wished they had been attacked on his behalf, and they even scolded the incompetent French Guards 1,000 times in their hearts. Family members, because there is a double monthly ticket event at Kidian recently, the author hereby begs everyone to vote more. Please. Love you. Chapter 131. I have a date with the princess. Suddenly, from the marble square in front of the main entrance of the Palace of Versailles, a girl shouted angrily, "The French Guards can't even stop two gangsters. They must be severely punished." The noble girls in the corridor heard this and nodded in agreement. Yes, it was them who caused His Highness the Crown Prince to be injured. "I heard that there was a loophole in the security arrangement of Bersonville, and the gangsters slipped in. I Don't know how badly His Highness is injured and when he will recover. When Joseph heard the loud condemnation outside, his eyes suddenly brightened, and he hurriedly whispered to Emma to thank the noble girl who speaks for justice on his behalf. Soon, word spread among the girls that Mademoiselle Andréan was thanked by the Dauphin for condemning the French guards. So more girls began to join the condemnation team. By noon, 200 to 300 people had gathered outside the office of the Minister of War, loudly demanding severe punishment of the French guards. Soon, their brothers or male friends were also brought in, and the team grew further. At this time, Dr. Lamech and his daughter were visiting the Crown Prince's bedside. His Royal Highness's injury should have stabilized. Perna finished the examination and looked back at her father, feeling relieved. Lamech nodded and was giving Joseph some instructions on how to recover from his injuries. When he heard the voice of the etiquette officer, Princess Maria has arrived, he hurriedly pulled his daughter and retreated to the crowd of nobles who came to watch. The Princess of the Sicilies walked in with red eyes. Perna was leaning next to her father, but she glared at her fiercely, thinking to herself, if she didn't insist on coming here for a trip, she wouldn't have given the gangsters an opportunity to take advantage of her. Fortunately, the Crown Prince was blessed by God and was not seriously injured. She didn't realize that her anger actually stemmed more from the fact that she had to make way for this little girl just now when she was visiting His Highness. It also stems from the fact that the girl whose breasts are not as big as mine may one day become the Crown Princess, but I can only stand aside and silently take care of his health. When Joseph saw Maria's eyes red from crying, he couldn't help but feel full of apology and guilt. In order to bring down Basonville, he gave her a fright in vain. Maria curtsied and bowed and asked softly, Your Highness, the Crown Prince, are you feeling better? Joseph smiled and nodded. I'm much better now. Thank you for coming to visit me. Please sit down. Maria lowered her head and seemed to have spent a lot of effort before she said, Your Highness, you are in trouble because you came to pick me up. Joseph hurriedly waved his hands and said, No, this is not your fault. Please don't blame yourself. Maria's heart suddenly warmed up. She was already prepared to be blamed, but she didn't expect His Highness to be so forgiving. Tears suddenly burst out again. Your Highness. Woo. Hey, don't cry. I'm really fine. Comforting crying girls was not Joseph's forte. He pinched his brows, not knowing what to say, when he saw the nobles who were watching suddenly turn to their side and stood upright to salute. Then Queen Mary, wearing a pink and white dress and not even having her hair done, walked over quickly and waved anxiously. Oh God, why are you sitting up? Lie down quickly. The doctor told you to rest more. Joseph smiled, caressed his chest, and lowered his head. Mom, I'm much better now. I'm fine. The Queen asked the maid to place the various desserts brought by her in front of her son, and then exchanged greetings. Suddenly she caught sight of Princess Maria at the side, and her face immediately turned gloomy. She had already determined that her niece was the most suitable daughter-in-law, and the Princess of the Sicilies was an annoying distraction. As a result, her son was attacked because of her, and she became even more dissatisfied with her. When the latter saw the Queen looking over, he quickly wiped away his tears and stepped forward to salute. Queen Mary turned her head and deliberately said to Countess de Benenac, Please let all irrelevant people leave, so as not to affect the Crown Prince's rest. Yes, Your Majesty. Countess de Benenac immediately turned around and chased away the people. Maria bit her lip, took 2 steps back, bowed, and turned around to leave with her maid. Seeing Maria's aggrieved look, Joseph guessed that the Queen might be angry with her. He felt even more guilty at the moment, and hurriedly said to her back, Princess Maria, I'm sorry that it has affected your travel. When I feel better, please allow me to be your guide and take you to visit Paris. Maria paused, turned her head sharply, her dark eyes lit up again, and said secretly, So His Highness likes. No, at least he didn't leave a bad impression on me. That's enough. She immediately turned her body around, lifted up her skirt, bowed, and said with a smile, Thank you for the invitation, and I hope you recover quickly. I will pray for you every day. Perna felt sad for no reason. She had known the Crown Prince for so long, and he had never invited her to visit anything. She shook her head again, walked out of the bedroom quickly, and blamed herself. Perna, what are you thinking about? It would be good to be able to see the Crown Prince often, and do some daily checks on him. With your identity, how can you have any other extravagant hopes? 4 days later, the French Guards camp point a gendarmerie officer with the rank of general handed a stack of documents in his hand to the Minister of Justice and said politely, Baron Breteuil, do you think the review status of these people is about this? The latter nodded, signed the document, and pressed it a few times with the seal on the ring point. The 5 officers of the French Guards on the document, as well as the 4 who completed the review the day before yesterday, were on duty elsewhere on the day the Crown Prince was attacked. There was basically no suspicion, so the review process was very fast. Another gendarmerie officer who was slightly older and had a thick layer of powder on his face took the document from his hand and said with a smile, then I will apply to the Marquis of St. Priest later to reinstate them. Oh, as well as the duties of Lieutenant Colonel Orban and others the day before yesterday. Breteuil and Vermorel looked at each other and nodded. Okay, General Astu, I will also report the situation here to Her Majesty the Queen. Just when General Astu was about to hand over the documents to his clerk, Breteuil's assistant quickly ran over, holding his hat, whispered a few words to the Minister of Justice, and handed over a pile of documents to the Minister of Justice. The latter frowned and opened the document. After reading only a few pages, he pushed it in front of Astu, coughed lightly and said, General, it seems that the review by those people just now cannot be completed yet. Astu looked at the information in confusion and saw on the first page a report that Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bertrand d'Orban embezzled military equipment purchase funds 3 years ago. On the next page, there is a report about another officer who completed the review the day before yesterday and accidentally maimed a soldier the year before. There were 6 or 7 pages of reports on the officers they had reviewed. He turned to look at Breteuil with a dark face. Where does this come from? I don't know either. Someone sent these to my assistant this morning. Anyway, we can't pretend we didn't see these things. In a small office in Paris more than 10 miles away, Mr. Desmoulins, the new captain of the 2nd Action Team of the Impartial Investigation Office, looked at Merritt, who was writing rapidly, and said with some hesitation, Mr. Ma, there is no evidence for these things you wrote. It's not good to just report it like this, right? Thanks. To Mr. Zoyang Yang for generously tipping this book. Cheyenne Haitian is grateful. Chapter 130 to a thorough investigation of the French Guard. Merritt stopped writing and looked up at Desmoulins. Camille, you know that the rumors about those shameless officers will only miss out on their evil deeds and will almost never be unjust. Besides, what I wrote was only maybe in their arsigns. The officers will not be convicted of this. The military police will definitely investigate specifically. Wouldn't it be great if evidence is found? He continued to write a report letter. What I regret most is that the Impartial Investigation Office has no spare power to investigate those bastards in the army. Yes, after Joseph learned that the military police would be responsible for the review of the French Guards, he immediately began the next step of response. He first asked Fouch to hand over some black information about French Guard officers to Merritt, much of which he had heard from the officer named Tiralx when he was investigating the shelling of the farmhouse. With Merritt's character, he naturally could not tolerate these evil officers, so he immediately launched an investigation. As expected, through his own reporter channel, he found out more dirty things about the officers, and it was indeed benefited from the corruption in the old army. Corruption and violence are so common that a quick search will reveal them. Then Joseph accidentally told Merritt that the Minister of Justice and the military police were currently investigating the officers on a large scale, and maybe they needed some clues. Merritt immediately and generously told the Minister of Justice what he had learned about the officer over at the French Guards barracks. The gendarmerie department had to reinvestigate officers who had previously completed their review. The Minister of Justice and the 2nd Captain of the Queen's Guard were watching, and it was not easy for them to openly show favoritism. So in less than 3 days, some clues were actually found in some of the reports. The military police had no choice but to invest more manpower and energy and launch a larger scale investigation. In this way, until nearly half a month later, The review of the first batch of 9 officers has not yet ended. There are more than 200 middle and senior officers in the entire French Guard. And there are 700 to 800 junior officers at present. These people are imprisoned in the military camp, waiting nervously for the review. That will come at any time. However, the more anxious they are, the slower the review speed becomes. This feeling of having a knife hanging over your head, but never falling, is the most painful point. Moreover, these officers used to have at least 8 hours of free time every day, and could go to Paris, to have fun at any time. But now they are sitting in the barracks, let alone balls and women, and even eat only the rough food in the barracks. To them, it's no different than going to jail. Soon, rumors began to spread in the military camp, saying that the Queen had spread her anger on the French guards because of the attack on the Crown Prince, and was preparing to exile all the officers. Of course, Joseph also had people spread this news. The officers, who were already in panic all day long, had long lost the ability to calmly distinguish between truth and falsehood. Few people questioned these rumors, which became increasingly exaggerated. As a result, the officers began to show their talents and frantically contacted their contacts to find a solution. Almost half of the military aristocracy was alarmed. The Duke of Orleans also heard about the situation in the French Guards barracks, so he had to find the Minister of War Saint Priest again, and promised to increase the activity funds, and asked him to keep those officers. These people were all under his command. The support of the army. The Marquis of Saint Priest did not dare to accept this windfall this time, because he had no way to do anything about it now. In recent days, many influential military nobles came to say hello to him, or wrote personal letters, urging him to complete the French Guard review matter as soon as possible. If it were an ordinary case that not many people knew about, he would have done it in private. But the situation in the French Guards had to be reported to the Queen every day, and reporters did not know where they got the letter reporting the officers. Now the newspapers were full of reports about investigating officers with so many eyes staring up and down. Even if he wanted to do something, he couldn't find a way to do it. That night, in an officer's villa in the southern suburbs of Paris, Saint Priest was thinking hard with several senior officials of the gendarmerie department when the aide-de-camp of General Estelle from the gendarmerie department knocked on the door in a panic. A few words were whispered into the ear. Estelle suddenly looked shocked. Really? The attendant grimaced and handed over a newspaper. General, it has been published in the newspaper. It is said that the Minister of Justice has also received evidence. Street Priest and others looked over quickly. General Estelle, what happened? Assel looked gloomy and said, have you heard about the fact that a farmhouse in the southern suburbs of Paris was shelled last month and 2 people died? Several people around him nodded. Estelle pointed to the newspaper. There is news that this was done by people from the French Guard, and then the blame was put on the Paris Police Academy. It seems that Breteuil has received the evidence. Early the next morning, hundreds of protesters gathered outside the French Guard camp, demanding severe punishment for the murderers of the Axel couple. This is because the military camp is relatively far from the city. Otherwise there would definitely be more people coming to protest. The shelling incident had caused a lot of trouble before, but it was deftly resolved by Joseph using crisis public relations. At this time, the boomerang hit the French Guards, but they had no means to deal with it. Based on the clues received, Breteuil asked the military police to find the cannon that the police intelligence department had found to actually bombard Axel's house, and arrested all the gunners responsible for operating the cannon. After interrogation, the gunner, who had been in a state of mental stress, quickly confessed and recruited his own officers. Finally, Colonel Theodore, commander of the 2nd Battalion of the French Guards Artillery Battalion, was implicated. When the news came back, all of Paris was shaken. People took to the streets one after another, angrily demanding that Theodore and other murderers be hanged. At the same time, many people gathered outside the Paris Police Academy to apologize to the police academy for having wronged them before. It is widely known that the Paris Police Department, despite being wrongly accused, went all out to help the Axel family repair their house, and provided thousands of livres in aid. Reputation skyrocketed. For a time, the Paris police almost became what people call an example of caring for the poor. Even when patrolling, His head was held higher than usual. The number of young people who came to the police academy to register that day exceeded 500. Friant, the dean of the police academy, had to temporarily close the admissions entrance point. Palace of Versailles. Berthier carefully glanced in the direction of the Dauphin's palace and nervously arranged his appearance over and over again, feeling quite uneasy in his heart. Although he has not yet taken office, he can still be regarded as the battalion commander of the French Guards. I wonder if the Crown Prince will be angry with him because of the poor protection of the guards this time. Dear readers, please give me your monthly tickets, because Gideon has recently launched a double monthly ticket campaign. If the monthly tickets exceed 1,000 this month, I can participate in the lottery. I have never received a lottery before. I hope everyone can give me a chance to draw this lottery, please. Family. Chapter 133. New Regiment. Commander Lieutenant Colonel Berthier. Berthier took a deep breath, walked into the Crown Prince's bedroom from among the guards, and immediately saluted Joseph with his chest. Your Highness the Crown Prince, are you feeling better? Joseph sat upright on the hospital bed, smiled and nodded. I'm much better now, Mr. Leader. I'm glad you came to see me. He immediately asked Emmon to invite all the nobles who were watching out on the grounds that he wanted to rest. Captain? Berthier was stunned for a moment, thinking it was a slip of the tongue by the Crown Prince, and quickly reminded him in a low voice, Your Highness, I'm just the battalion commander. Joseph seemed not to have heard and motioned to the chair next to the bed. Please sit down. Oh, by the way, do you remember the military reform I mentioned to you before? Yes, Your Highness. Berthier nodded. Although the Crown Prince only briefly spoke to him when watching the drill at the police academy, he often went to the police academy afterwards and heard Du Bois introduce to him in detail His Highness's military reform plan. I was particularly impressed by the military service regulations, the promotion system, and the establishment of the general staff. Oh, it seems that you already have a good understanding of the contents of the military reform. Joseph nodded happily. So, what do you think of my military reform plan? Seeing that the Crown Prince did not mention the French Guards, Berthier was slightly relieved, and immediately said what he had always wanted to say when discussing with Du Bois. Your Highness, although France has a seemingly very powerful army, in fact, with all due respect, it is more like a big tree that is rotten inside. The failure of the 7 Years' War is the best proof. Our generals obviously realized that and made some changes, but I don't think that was nearly enough. I participated in the Anglo-American War. Our troops had no advantage even against the British Army, and your military reform plan has corrected almost all the deficiencies in the current military and proposed many innovations. This is what France needs most right now. Joseph immediately answered, so, do you think it is possible to implement military reform now? Berthier immediately frowned, and after a moment, he shook his head and said, it should be difficult to implement. Just adjusting the promotion system will be opposed by almost all military officers. At present, French military officers are firmly controlled by the nobles. First of all, it is very difficult for civilians to enter military academies. Even if they can go to military academies, most of them major in engineering and technology, and it is almost impossible to come into contact with combat command point after graduating from the military academy and entering the army. Even if a civilian has great abilities, it is impossible to be promoted to a lieutenant or above. In fact, let alone civilians, it is impossible for even minor nobles to become majors. In addition to the suppression and exclusion of the hereditary military nobles, the cost of promotion was also beyond the affordability of the small nobles. Yes, in France nowadays, officers have to pay a large sum of money for promotion. The higher the position, the higher the fee. Even some nobles from poor families, when they reach the rank of colonel, will be stuck in their original positions for more than 10 years because of lack of money. In addition, like the bureaucracy, officer positions in the French army can also be bought with direct money. Moreover, the purchased officers have the same command rights as the officers with serious academic background. Such donating officers accounted for fully 1/3 of the French army. In other words, if a full-scale war really breaks out, at least 1/3 of the French soldiers will fight against the enemy under the command of purely amateurs. This result can be imagined. An important item in the military reform proposed by Joseph is that promotion should only be based on ability and military merit, regardless of origin. At the same time, no fees are required for promotion. There is also a strict prohibition on selling military positions. This will undoubtedly allow more talents to be promoted to the top of the French army, but it will also break the monopoly of military aristocrats on officers, so they will definitely resist military reform. Yes, you are right, Joseph said solemnly. Not only the promotion system, but also changes such as weapons procurement, recruitment system, and military merit system will be opposed by those people. Berthier's expression was a little gloomy. Although he was born into a minor noble, he was a victim of the existing military system. He almost went into debt for his current rank of major. And this time, in order to join the French Guard, he spent all his wealth. But it was still not enough. If it had not been for the generous help of the Dauphin, he would have returned to Soissons in despair. He whispered, "Yes, your highness. Therefore, military reform will be a very long process." That's not necessarily the case. Joseph suddenly smiled. For example, there is an opportunity right now that allows me to take the first step in military reform immediately. He looked at Berthier. Of course, this still requires your assistance. The latter immediately stood up and bowed. "Your highness, I will obey your orders." "Thank you, Major Berthier." "Oh, first of all, you will be promoted to commander of the infantry regiment." "Ah, Baron," Bretteville said, "do you have a way to calm things down?" War Minister Saint Priest looked at the middle-aged man in front of him suspiciously. If there was really no other way, he would definitely not believe that a mid-level officer could solve the current trouble. But he never expected that the review of the French Guard would develop into what it is now. Theodore and others who caused the tragedy of shelling the farmhouse have been transferred to a military court for prosecution. But this has not weakened people's dissatisfaction with the French Guards at all. Especially after the attack on the Crown Prince was reported, the people of Paris became even more angry. The Crown Prince led police reforms, improved the security environment in Paris, and gained a high reputation among citizens, which led to more and more people protesting outside the French Guard camp. In particular, the citizens of the Saint-Antoine district kept throwing dirt at the military camp, swearing loudly, and almost rushed in. A large number of aristocratic ladies also blocked outside his office, demanding a strict investigation of the officers who led to the attack on His Highness. As a result, he has not dared to show up in the office for a long time. At the same time, people in the military kept asking him to keep the officers of the French Guard. Just when he was struggling, the Minister of Justice told him that this mid-level officer named Berthier might be able to help him resolve his dilemma. He was also seriously ill and sought medical treatment, so he decided to meet this person. Berthier, sitting opposite, seemed a little reserved. "General, do you know why some people keep reporting on officers of the French Guard and even lead them out of Axel's farmhouse?" "Oh, do you know what's going on?" Berthier immediately followed Joseph's script and replied, "Yes, General. As far as I know, it is because Her Majesty the Queen is very angry about the injury of the Crown Prince, so she wants to vent her anger by punishing the officers of the guard." Chapter 134. The Crown Prince. "Don't try to get more from me, you bastard." The Minister of War narrowed his eyes when he heard this. If the Queen was behind the scenes, then the information that reported the officers of the French Guard was obtained by the secret police, the minions of the royal family. Including the case of shelling the farmhouse. They also found out. This really makes sense. A woman who wants to protect her son is no different than an angry lioness. He looked at Berthier. "How do you know this?" The latter involuntarily shrank back and said vaguely, "General, I naturally have a unique source of information. The important thing is that I can guarantee that the information is reliable and that I have a way to solve your troubles, Marquis." Saint Priest looked him up and down again and nodded slowly. "Okay, please tell me what you can do." Berthier quickly recalled his words, feeling like he was facing an exam. To be honest, he didn't like being pushed to the stage, but the Crown Prince said that he was the most suitable candidate this time. In order to repay His Highness, he mustered up the courage to come here. "First of all, you have to calm public opinion as quickly as possible, Saint Priest nodded. How to do it specifically? Announce to the outside world that the military will severely punish those who cause the attack on the crown prince. Then they will take out a few small fish and shrimps, impose heavy sentences, and make a show. Berthier crossed his fingers nervously and continued, for the shelling of the farmhouse those who are involved, especially the leader Theodore, it is best to have a public trial, to establish a fair image of the military police department. The Minister of War waved his hand and interrupted him a little irritably. What you said is very useful, but if there are still people who continue to report officers, then the matter will never end. Berthier nodded. Yes, General, and I can make a difference here. What can you do? The root of all problems lies in the fact that the Dauphin was attacked and injured. If His Highness can express his forgiveness in front of the Queen for those not involved in the French Guards, and Bissonville and several officers have been severely punished, I believe Her Majesty the Queen should forgive him. This matter will not be pursued any further. Saint Priest frowned and said, His Royal Highness the Crown Prince's injuries are not healed right now, and he must be very resentful of the French Guards. How can he speak for them? Actually, I'm a close friend with an important figure around the Crown Prince. Berthier lied, unable to even look directly at the Minister of War. And he sacrificed his life to protect His Highness during this attack. He was awarded His Highness praise. If he can help, he should be very confident that he can convince the Crown Prince. Street Priest sat upright when he heard this. Are you telling the truth? Yes, General. Saint Priest stared at him for a moment and nodded. So, may I ask, what do you want to get? Finally, getting to the point, Berthier secretly took a breath and said, You know, I come from an ordinary background, so I can only do research, and at most manage an engineering battalion, and I have always wanted to be a real officer, the kind who can command an army, to charge into battle on the battlefield. So, I want a group. Saint Priest immediately showed a relaxed smile. This is not difficult, Major Berthier. I remember that I was the one who signed your transfer to Paris. Now I will sign the letter of appointment for you to be promoted to regimental commander. Oh, I should call you Lieutenant Colonel Berthier now. Berthier immediately responded, General, please wait until I finish speaking. Oh, do you have any other requests? Well, what I want is an elite corps. Okay. Compared to the big trouble in front of him, the leader of an elite regiment didn't care about Saint Priest at all. For example, elites like the French Guard. Berthier rubbed his hands, and it would be best if I could select my own soldiers. Saint Priest frowned slightly. This little officer was really rude. However, he immediately thought that the reputation of the French Guard was completely ruined at the moment, and even the station was kicked out to the town of Maretravain, and it was estimated that it would soon become a second-rate force. Forget it. Let him pick whatever he wants. So he nodded again. I can promise you. After finishing all the details, Berthier stood up and prepared to leave. Marquis Saint Priest sent him to the door and suddenly asked, Mr. Lieutenant Colonel, can you tell me who the person behind you is? He judged from Berthier's demeanor just now, and the energy that the latter should have, that he was probably just the spokesperson of some big shot. General, please wait for my good news. Berthier bowed and saluted, and immediately got into the carriage. The Minister of War looked at the carriage going away, and whispered to himself, is it General Castanet? No, he should not have such great influence in Paris. Or Baron Breteuil? Berthier was recommended by him. Or, it's the Queen herself. He immediately smiled and shook his head. If the Queen had such a plan, how could France be like this? Joseph leaned on the hospital bed and suddenly frowned. After listening to Berthier's words, he agreed so quickly. Yes, Your Highness. I agreed with almost no hesitation. Joseph slapped his thigh with a look of regret on his face. This means that the price is too low. Please, you have to go there again tomorrow. After explaining the matter of raising the price on the ground, he told Berthier, I will let Major Dubois and the people from the police academy help you select soldiers. We don't want any officers who are from a noble family, or bought with money. Those who have violated military discipline, or have criminal records are not accepted. Remember to take away all the military horses, weapons and equipment. Take as much clothing, tents and other military supplies as you can. Don't be polite. Berthier stared at the crown prince with wide eyes, feeling that he was very talented as a robber. At night, Joseph looked at the stars outside the window and carefully went through all the people who needed to be dealt with. In his mind he had to find a new prey for Marat, otherwise the latter would definitely stare at the officers of the French guard until they were completely torn apart. There is no need for Joseph to completely break up with the military nobles yet. His goal has always been to obtain the elite of the French guard and to defeat Bissonville and other Orleans faction guys. Now that the goals have basically been achieved, it's time to call it a day. With the pro-royal Flanders brigade stationed in Paris, and Bissonville, a young man, exiled to the Seychelles, at least in history, there were riots in Paris, and the situation, where the garrison stood aside and watched, will not happen again. The Duke of Orleans, Joseph, shook his head. This guy's foundation was too strong. Even if he got a handle on him, it wouldn't be easy to do it. The great nobles in the Council of Dignities who still want to decentralize power, there are too many targets and they are too scattered, and now Mera and the others are short of manpower, so the effect will not be very good. Today is the last day of 2023, and I feel a little nostalgic about it. I also hope that all my friends will have better times in 2024. I love you all. Mwah. Chapter 135. Go ahead, Mr. Muller. Joseph immediately thought of the group of bankers who invested large sums of French funds in England and couldn't help but feel bitter. If the dirty information about these guys can be found out, it will not only be very satisfying, but also effectively rectify the financial industry point. But Joseph was immediately discouraged. There were still too many targets in the banking industry, and these people were not government officials. If the impartial investigation office was asked to investigate them, Merit, a friend of the people, might also have objections. It would be great if there could be a representative of the banking industry who was also an official. Thinking of this, his eyes suddenly lit up. There really was such a person. Although he is no longer an official, he was the finance minister for a long time before, and was closely connected with the banking industry. Oh, to be precise, he is a banker himself. The period when Necker was in charge of France's finances was the beginning of France's path of no return from relying on high interest loans to maintain its finances. The finance ministers after him wanted to get out of this vicious cycle of borrowing new debt to repay old debts, but they were forced to continue borrowing because of the pressure of high interest rates. A chill flashed in Joseph's eyes. Judging from Necker's various operations, he had no problem before going to hell. Now let the impartial investigation office investigate this guy. Firstly, it can divert Mera's attention. Secondly, if something is really discovered, a large number of unscrupulous banking giants may be implicated in the future. Early the next morning, Joseph asked Emin to go to the Chancellor of Finance's office and transfer all the financial information that Necker had when he was the treasurer. He was Swiss and could not be named directly as Chancellor of Finance, but his authority was not reduced at all. Files loaded onto 4 trolleys. Joseph ordered Kesod to send personal guards to escort these files to the office of the impartial investigation office. Sure enough, without Joseph's explanation, Merit came by himself at noon the next day. Joseph still treated him the same way. First, he complained that Necker maliciously increased fiscal expenditures by colluding with banking giants, and then borrowed large amounts of money from banks and transferred high interest rates to the banks. Then, described the serious harm caused by the national financial crisis to the French people. Finally, it points out the direction of development for Piranha. Go ahead and tear Necker apart for the sake of the French people. But this time Merit seemed extremely hesitant. Your Highness, please forgive me. Mr. Necker has a very good reputation. When he was in charge of the country's finances, the balance of payments was almost balanced. You won't think it's because he has disclosed the royal family's extravagance and waste and deliberately discredit him. Joseph smiled. Necker was indeed very good at packaging himself. When the Three Estates meeting was held in history, all 3 estates were very fond of him. Even Louis XVI regarded him as a savior. But as a person who is familiar with history, Joseph is quite clear about what this guy has done. Mr. Mera, villains don't have the word bad guy written on their faces. The impartial investigation office is trying to see through the superficial disguise to find out the real shady story inside. Joseph leaned forward and whispered, "Do you know where the first loan for the government came from after Necker became the treasurer?" Mera obviously had a rough look at the financial files. He opened his notebook and glanced at it. "It's a Swiss bank." "That's right." Joseph nodded. "Then did you know that this bank was opened by Necker and his friends?" Mera was startled, then shook her head. Joseph said coldly, "In other words, the first thing Mr. Necker did after taking office was to get a big business for his bank, and the interest rate was quite high. There's more you don't know. For example, when Mr. Necker was young, he cooperated with his British banking friends and mobilized large amounts of funds to wrestle grain between Britain and France, causing grain prices to skyrocket at that time. 4. Another example, in order to become the treasurer of the treasury, Mr. Necker used hundreds of thousands of livres, plus shares in his own bank, to bribe many senior officials." Mera could no longer hold back, stood up and said, "Your Highness, I will find out all this, but it may only prove that you are biased against Mr. Necker." Joseph smiled and nodded. "I look forward to you bringing more justice to the French people." Merritt bowed and was about to leave when Joseph said again, "Oh, by the way, Mr. Marrett, did you just say that the financial balance during the Necker period became stable?" "Yes, Your Highness, this is true. The fact is that the so-called balance of payments is based on excess loans. The interest on the loans is not obvious in a short period of time, so the balance of payments situation seems good, but the interest will snowball. The harm is it will not appear until more than 10 years later. In other words, a large part of the current fiscal deficit comes from his loans at that time." "Thank you for the reminder, Your Highness." Mera saluted again, turned around and left with some excitement. Drawing Merritt's attention away from the French guards, Joseph summoned Baron Breteuil, hinting that he could be more lenient in reviewing the officers of the French guards. It was the Crown Prince and Archbishop Bourrienne who supported Breteuil to the position of Minister of Justice, and since it was a matter of reviewing military officers, that was not good for him and easily aroused hatred. He immediately agreed. Over at the French guards barracks, the number of letters reporting officers suddenly decreased, and the review speed of the military police department immediately accelerated a lot. After the Marquis de Saint-Priest received the news, he was quite surprised that Berthier really had such great energy, so he simplified all the procedures, signed the letter of appointment almost immediately, and promoted Berthier to lieutenant colonel, and was appointed commander of the 3rd Infantry Regiment of the French Guards. However, just after noon, Berthier came to him and said that he had encountered a small problem. "So, what does your best friend want?" Saint-Priest asked with a frown. "Ah, that's it. He has a younger brother who just graduated from the military academy and is currently just an ordinary second lieutenant." Berthier repeated the Crown Prince's request. He hopes that his younger brother can serve as a battalion commander in the French Guard. The Marquis of Saint-Priest let out a long sigh. He had already given away his cows, so how could he still be reluctant to part with the rein? He immediately nodded and said, "Just do as he said. You ask him to go as soon as possible. He studied cavalry command, so he hopes to be in a cavalry battalion." Okay. Whether it's the cavalry or something else, let's do it." Saint-Priest rubbed his forehead vigorously. He was already numb at this time and just hoped that this nightmare would end soon. Berthier acted quickly. After being promoted to regimental commander, he immediately came to the French Guards camp with Dubois and Quesaud's cousin Adalic, and began to select his troops thanks to Mr. Munanhur for his generous reward for this book. The young author is grateful. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 136. With the army in hand, I own the world. The selection of ordinary soldiers is relatively easy. Priority will be given to those with good performance on resumes, and those who have violated military discipline or criminal records will be eliminated. an infantry regiment, and a cavalry battalion. A total of more than 1,700 soldiers were picked up in a few days. What is more troublesome is the screening of officers in accordance with the instructions of the Crown Prince. Berthier eliminated all school level officers, leaving only the captain. There is no need to worry about the lack of mid-level and high-level commanders, because many of the captain officers have the capabilities of mid-level officers, but they have been stuck in the lieutenant rank just because of their background or lack of money. Discover some outstanding ones from these people and improve them to have far greater combat capabilities than the original hereditary officers among the remaining officers. No one from a noble family was left behind, and some of the officers with low moral character had to be eliminated. The entire selection process lasted for more than 10 days before it was completed. When Joseph received the report that Berthier's team had been compiled, he immediately miraculously got off the hospital bed and took off the bandage on his arm. In fact, the wound had healed long ago, leaving only a small scar. The next day, he came to Paris and visited the public trial of Theodore, the mastermind of the shelling of the farmhouse, and several of his men. The so-called trial was just a show. In order to appease public anger, the verdict was actually decided a few days in advance. Theodore and Kemmer, who ordered the cannon at the scene, were sentenced to beheading, while several other accomplices were given different sentences such as imprisonment or hard labor. When the judge of the military court announced the verdict, loud cheers suddenly erupted in the square in front of the Paris City Hall. Many people shouted revenge for the Axels, and raindrops of stones were thrown at Theodore. If the gendarmes hadn't blocked them with shields, the murderers wouldn't have had to go to the execution ground and would have been killed directly. Then, amid the cheers of the crowd, Joseph climbed up and announced, "The injuries I suffered during the attack have healed. After review, the pests in the French Guard have been eliminated, and the other officers and soldiers are innocent. I hope everyone will stop disturbing them." People immediately shouted again, "Thank God, the Crown Prince is safe. Praise be to the Crown Prince for his kindness. May God grant the Crown Prince good health. Long live the Crown Prince." At the same time, the newspapers controlled by Joseph also began to cooperate, focusing all the blame on Besenval, or Theodore and others, propagating that other members of the French Guard were not responsible. It only hurt the officers who were reported in the first place. Their crimes of corruption or beating soldiers were found out, and they were used as sacrifices to calm the public anger. Less than a week later, the review by the French Guard was completed. The public opinion that once caused an uproar quickly forgot about this matter. The officers and soldiers of the French Guards who had escaped the disaster were overjoyed. They wanted to celebrate, but suddenly they thought that the responsibility of defending Paris had been handed over to the two regiments sent by the Flanders Brigade, which had been renamed Paris Legion. And they were deprived of the title of the French Guard and changed to the Mirette Corps, and could only be stationed in a remote town. However, some of them soon saw the light. Their new regiment commander, Lieutenant Colonel Berthier, took them and Dodlic's cavalry battalion to leave the Mirette Corps station and go to Paris, which they were familiar with, Mars school ground in the southern suburbs. These more than 2,200 people are basically the most elite part of the original French Guard. The newly appointed commander of the Mirette Corps, Marquis Merit, looked extremely helpless when he looked at the remaining more than 1,500 officers and soldiers at present. Any officer who has the ability or background is willing to take over the French Guard's mess. Merit is the weakling who was sent to wipe his ass before he came to take office. He had heard that Captain Berthier was extremely powerful, and it was he who resolved the crisis in the French Guard. Therefore, Merit did not dare to say anything about the behavior of Berthier and Adoric, completely treating them as if they were not his subordinates on the Mars campus. More than 2,000 officers and soldiers brought by Berthier lined up neatly and looked toward the viewing platform in front of them with anxiety, not knowing what instructions their new regiment leader would have. However, the first person to walk up to the viewing platform was a young man wearing a blue and white military uniform. Their regiment leader and several officers surrounded the young man. Joseph looked at the dark soldiers in the audience, and his heart was filled with excitement and relief. After coming to this world for so long, He finally has an army that is completely at his command. Although there are not many people, not even officers, this is a starting point with special significance, the integration of royal power and military power. From then on, he truly has the ability and means to change the future of France. No, maybe the whole of Europe will be completely changed from this moment. Under the stage, a trumpet sounded, and an officer shouted, "Gun salute." The flag whisperer immediately waved the small flag quickly, and performed several movements. 2,000 soldiers raised their guns, and saluted at the same time. Joseph raised his hat, and nodded secretly to the level of training of these soldiers. After all, they were elite troops defending Paris. The officer in the audience shouted again, "Stand at attention." Joseph then said loudly, "I believe everyone knows me. Today, on behalf of the royal family, I come to visit His Majesty the King's most loyal troops." The flag bearer immediately waved the flag to convey the order, and the soldiers on the school field immediately shouted in unison, "Long live His Majesty the King." Joseph continued, "From now on, you will become an example for all French soldiers, and become a new type of army that is different from any previous army." The officers and soldiers below were all extremely surprised. They thought that, because of the attack on the Crown Prince, their military career would be hopeless, but they did not expect that the Crown Prince suddenly arrived and said that he would set an example for French soldiers. However, after the Crown Prince only talked about the new promotion mechanism and military pay mechanism on the stage, everyone could no longer keep calm. For a while, they even forgot about discipline and started whispering, "Can you be promoted to mid-level officer without being a noble?" His Highness said, "Can be promoted to any position, that is, including senior military officers. You can be promoted based only on ability and military merit. Thank God, we all have the opportunity to become officers. You don't have to pay any fees for promotion. That's the most important thing. Did you hear it?" His Highness said that from now on, military pay will not go through the officers, but will be paid directly to us by the military pay officer. I heard that. Military pay officers are directly assigned by the Minister of War. You no longer have to worry about being deducted from military pay. His Royal Highness also said that military pay will be increased. Oh, thank God. Thank His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. Joseph did not ask the officers to maintain order. He knew that with these two changes alone, he had won the absolute support of more than 2,000 officers and soldiers. Happy New Year, dear reader. Cheyenne Haitian wishes you all your wishes come true. Everything goes well, and you are happy every day. Point Book Club Group 1,036,217,580. Come on in and play happily with your friends. During the double monthly pass period, Cheyenne Haitian continues to ask for monthly passes. I beg for my monthly ticket. Chapter 137. The Crown Prince and -039 S Guards Regiment. The more than 2,000 officers and soldiers on the Mars campus were a little dazed. A few days ago, they felt that they were the most unlucky people in the world. They were inexplicably involved in the attack on the Crown Prince, and then came under scrutiny. They even thought that they were going to be exiled. And now, they feel that they are the luckiest people in the world, having inexplicably joined the new legion and accepted the review of the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince also announced a host of new regulations, giving them a promising future. If they weren't standing in the queue now, they would really want the people next to them to kick them to see if this was just a dream. After a while, Joseph signaled the soldiers to be quiet and then announced several regulations regarding military merit, pensions, retirement allowances, and even preferential treatment for soldiers' families. The officers and soldiers had previous experience. Although they seemed extremely excited this time, they suppressed it mentally and maintained discipline on the scene. After Joseph finished talking about the military reform project that was of vital interest to the soldiers, he took 2 pamphlets from Berthier on the side, raised them and waved them. For other military disciplines or systems, your regiment commander will issue them later. To each of you. I won't repeat it here. He put away the book, looked around at all the soldiers on the campus, and said loudly, no matter what your previous background is, or what your current unit number is, in the future, within the Legion, you can all call yourself King the Prince's Guards Corps of course, you must also use actual performance to prove that you are worthy of this title. The training in the future will be more rigorous than now, and the requirements for you will be higher, but all this will bring you more glory. Anyone who finds it unacceptable can apply to leave later and return to the French Guard. Oh, what are you calling now? Berthier was busy and whispered, "It's the Merit Corps, Your Highness." Joseph nodded. "You can return to the Merit Corps at any time." All officers and soldiers present automatically ignored this option. Are you kidding? Don't give up the unimpeded promotion. Don't give up the military salary that will not be deducted by the officers. Don't give up the high pension. Don't give up and return to the rotten Merit Corps. Crown Prince's Guards Corps. This title sounds impressive. Maybe he was directly promoted to the Royal Guards. Anyone who doesn't know how to choose must be stupid. Isn't it just more training and stricter requirements? What does it matter? Who hasn't experienced hardship before becoming a soldier? Whether you are a farmer or a craftsman, which one is not more difficult than now? Unexpectedly, the Crown Prince said loudly, "The first test you will face is to prove that you are at least stronger than the police and better at fighting." Oh, no, not the police, but the police academy students who have not yet graduated. The officers and soldiers on the school field laughed inwardly. After all, they used to be France's elite troops, and they dared to compete with the King's Guard. And what are the police? They are just hooligans recruited and managed by the government. At most, they can go to heaven after undergoing a police reform. If you can't even compare to these guys, isn't that a joke? However, they will soon learn how wrong they were. Finally, Joseph gestured to the two officers beside him. "They are your military pay officers. Every month from now on, they will bring the general's pay directly to you. If you think there are any problems with the military pay, you can even directly write to me and complain. Now, the military pay officer will pay you for the first time. In this way, in the happy payment process, the first review of the Crown Prince's Guards Corps came to an end. The soldiers counted the silver coins in their hands, and their faces were all happy. The lowest grade of military pay was raised from 13 livres to 15 livres, and that of a staff sergeant was raised from 17 livres to 20 livres. This salary may not seem high, but the soldiers are responsible for food, housing and clothing. All the money can be sent back home, which can support a family of 4 or 5. When Joseph came out of Mars School, he immediately went to the Paris Police Academy. The carriage had just gone more than half a mile when he saw a military camp under construction. This was the new camp for his Guards Corps from the beginning. He had no intention of letting the Corps return to the town of Moratran. He bought a piece of land here half a month ago and started building a camp. As for issues such as being far away from the garrison, he asked Berthier to apply for long-term overseas training from the Minister of War, and then he said hello to the Paris Legion currently stationed in Paris, so no one would comment too much. On the playground of the Paris Police Academy, Principal Joseph mobilized the trainees for the joint drill. In a few days after the mobilization, he went to the office of the Dean of Academic Affairs and inquired about the recent enrollment situation. There are currently more than 1,300 students in the school. Joseph looked at Friant in surprise. The latter nodded respectfully. "Your Highness, because of the help provided by the police department to the Axel couple, the number of people signing up for the police academy has surged recently. If the school building was not insufficient, the number might have exceeded 1,500 by now." Joseph was silent. He originally wanted to instruct the police academy to increase enrollment, but now it seems that this is not necessary. He turned to Friant. "From now on, students can choose to become combat policemen after graduation, or join the army. Lieutenant Colonel Berthier will let people know about the system and treatment in the army. You sent it. As for those who pass the elite class assessment, they can directly serve as officers." "Yes, Your Highness." Friant had heard the Crown Prince talk about setting up a combat police force before. It is basically a team wearing police uniforms, equipped with infantry weapons, and even equipped with some war horses. It is claimed that it is to deal with extremely vicious gangs such as the Blood Knife Gang who dare to attack the royal family. 2 days later, the Dauphin's guards welcomed more than 500 cadets from the Paris Police Academy at Mars campus. The two sides are about to conduct a joint exercise, which is actually a competition of military skills. As soon as the police academy cadets entered the scene, the officers and soldiers of the guards were surprised. Their straight uniforms, neat queues, and majestic momentum. Are these really a group of police officers who have not yet graduated? What they find most unacceptable is that the police academy cadets are equipped with the latest model of Charleville 1776 flintlock guns. You know, even the French guards only started to replace this kind of gun 3 years ago, and now 1/3 of them are still using the old model from the 7 Years' War, the 1763 type flintlock gun. And at the end of the police academy cadet team, there are actually more than 30 cavalrymen. Oh, they should be called mounted police officers. Chapter 138, The Victory of Tudor. As Guards Commander Berthier announced the start of the joint drill, the military and police immediately ran quickly to the center of the school grounds, led by their respective commanders. The drill process has been arranged long ago. There are 4 items in total, namely Q, shooting, marching and actual combat drills. What needs to be done at this time is the Q drill. Originally, the Guards Corps, which had many years of military experience, had an advantage in this regard. However, they have only just been reprogrammed. Although Berthier had made efforts to group soldiers from the same regiment together, many were now in unfamiliar companies and did not even recognize the drummers or flag bearers. The basics of standing at attention, walking in unison, turning, and handling guns are all okay. The professional soldier's demeanor is fully displayed, and he firmly dominates the police. However, when it comes to changing the cue, especially when changing while marching, several people who have not practiced together have much practice. The company began to fall into disarray. On the other hand, for the police officers, although they have only practiced formation for a few months, they all cooperate with each other very well. Especially the speed at which skirmishers transformed into infantry lines was astonishing to the Guards Corps. The soldiers don't know yet that this is necessary for the new impact tactics proposed by the Crown Prince. They will also practice it in the future, but for now they can only admit defeat. In the end, in terms of Q, most of the officers responsible for scoring gave the police officers higher scores. The officers and soldiers of the Guards Corps were shocked and felt that their self-esteem had been hit by tens of thousands of points. Their allied troops had lost to the police. During the subsequent shooting drill, the soldiers held their breath and prepared to open the eyes of the little policeman. Sure enough, with united efforts, the line shooting of the Guards Corps, which took the field first, achieved excellent results of 1 minute and 8 seconds and 75 hits in 3 rounds of shooting. There were only 300 infantry lines participating in the exercise. At a distance of 70 steps, this hit rate was extremely amazing. When the soldiers came out proudly, ready to watch the police officers laugh, the latter shocked them again by firing 3 rounds in 1 minute and 10 seconds, hitting 66 rounds. Although the police officers lost, this speed and hit rate are comparable to any army. It is said that these police officers have only practiced shooting for a few months. Of course, Joseph had asked the police academy to feed him such shooting skills with bullets. Each person has to shoot 3 rounds of ammunition every day. Don't think that this number is small. It is already very rare for the most elite troops in Europe to be able to fire live ammunition 3 times in 3 days. The gunpowder and bullets loaded into the gun are all money. The officers are all trying their best to make money for themselves. Who is willing to let the soldiers shoot at their own gold coins? After gaining a victory, the Guards Corps became more confident and prepared to continue teaching the police in the 3rd March exercise. Unexpectedly, they lost miserably. The police academy often conducts 1-mile cross-country courses with heavy loads, but currently no one in the European armies is training for physical fitness as a result. After the police officers completed a 5-mile march and returned to the school grounds, they waited for a full 10 minutes before the officers and soldiers of the guards rushed back panting. It wasn't until the actual combat exercises began that the Guards Corps finally showed its appearance as an elite force. The infantry and cavalry cooperated and quickly broke up the police's defense line. The final result was a 2-2 draw. although the score of the actual combat exercise was very important, allowing the Guards Corps to obtain a higher total score. The fact that they were almost tied with these young policemen who had not yet graduated made them no longer dare to underestimate the latter, so when Berthier announced that the Guards Corps would take turns going to the Paris Police Academy for training in the future, not a single soldier expressed objections even after someone privately inquired about the quality of the food at the police academy. They began to look forward to it. As a result, the number of students of a certain police academy principal instantly increased by more than 2,000. After Joseph returned to his office in Paris, the first person he met was Varenne, the assistant director of the Industrial Planning Bureau, who had stayed in Bordeaux and was responsible for assisting Vergniaud. The latter respectfully placed a stack of reports in front of the Crown Prince and said, "Your Highness, the spring sowing in the south has basically ended, and my subordinates will rush back to report the situation to you. Thanks to your efforts, more than 1/5 of the arable land in Bordeaux is now planted with potatoes this year." Oh, so many. Joseph was a little surprised. He thought that a 15% seeding rate would be good. After all, potatoes are 4 times more productive than grains. If you can grow 15% of potatoes, you can increase the total harvest by 60%. Varenne said, many small nobles or farmers saw that planters were sowing potatoes in large quantities, which increased their confidence in potatoes, so they also planted a lot. Joseph nodded with satisfaction and opened the report in front of him. What about other regions, Mr. Vigneault? Followed your method and used brewing technology to convince many planters in Burgundy and several southern provinces. The planting area in these places is about 15%. Joseph saw the numbers on the report. Burgundy 16%, Bayonne 15%, Foix 15%. Unexpectedly, Vigneault was so fast and even over-fulfilled the task. Varenne continued, Your Highness, a lot of potatoes are also grown in Brittany and Normandy, but the area is not as large as in the south. Joseph hurriedly turned back. Brittany 13%, Norman 11%. Although it is not much, it is still considered as additional income. Mr. Vigneault also went to the west. Varenne shook his head and said, Mr. Vergniaud moved from the south to Provence, but he asked a friend named Jean Sonnet to bring some people from the Brewing Technology Association to the west to promote it. Jean Sonnet? Joseph felt that this name was a bit familiar, and it seemed that he would also be one of the core figures of the Girondins in the future. It turns out that he and Vigneault started working together so early. But speaking of it, the Girondins were very efficient in their business promotion. He continued to look at the report and saw that Provence and Dauphin also had 6% minus 8% of the potato sowing area. It could be seen that, after passing through the southern provinces, Vergniaud went non-stop to the southeast. Joseph was talking to Varenne about potatoes when Emin led a palace official into the office and bowed. Your Highness, His Majesty the King has sent someone. The official stepped forward to salute and said with a smile on his face, Your Highness, His Majesty the King invites you to return to the Palace of Versailles as soon as possible. He said he has something important to tell you. Joseph hurriedly asked Emin to change his clothes and prepare to see his father. As soon as the group of people reached the door, a messenger hurriedly came and handed several letters sealed with fire paint to Emin. The latter glanced at the mark on the envelope and whispered to Joseph, Your Highness, I'm your grain purchaser. Please, readers, for the sake of me adding more updates, please give me more monthly votes. I really need a monthly pass and your encouragement. Chapter 139 Increase Revenue and Reduce Expenditure. The famous American 5-star critic General MacArthur once said, the world is vast, but Dad is the biggest. Dad's call must be the highest priority. Joseph looked helplessly towards the carriage and gestured to Emin. Go to the Palace of Versailles first, get in the carriage, and take a closer look. Yes, Your Highness. Not long after, several carriages drove out from the Industrial Planning Bureau. In the carriage, Joseph opened the envelopes one by one. The letter was sent by the 3 white gloves who bought food for him from overseas. For the sake of confidentiality, the code was used. Joseph took the code book from Emin again and read it carefully. In the letter, the white gloves first reported on the situation of food procurement. Generally speaking, they were relatively optimistic. In the first 2 batches, a total of nearly 70,000 seches of grain, 10,000 seches of corn, and more than 30,000 seches of potatoes were purchased from Britain, North Africa, Eastern Europe and other places. A CT is a commonly used unit of measurement nowadays. And 1 CT is 43 bushels. As for how much food it corresponds to, that's not necessarily the case point, because the bushel is a unit of volume. In actual operation, a large barrel is used to hold grain, and a full barrel is 1 bushel. For example, grains are roughly 45 to 50 French pounds, and potatoes are 55 to 60 French pounds. In other words, during this period, 3 white gloves have bought back nearly 20 million pounds of grain from all over the world. And according to Joseph's request, wherever they go, they will first spend money to find people with local influence and publish news in newspapers saying that this year will be a good harvest year and the supply of food is likely to exceed demand. Anyway, it's still early for the autumn harvest, so it's not up to them to say whatever they want. After that, the local grain prices will start to fall, and the white glove guys will enter the market to buy. As soon as the price rebounds slightly, they will leave immediately. Therefore, their tens of millions of pounds of grain were basically bought at a fair price. Joseph made a rough calculation in his mind. According to this purchasing speed, he should be able to buy about 500 million pounds of grain before the hail comes in July. It would certainly not be possible to survive the Great Famine with this food alone, but now that nearly 1/3 of France's provinces have planted potatoes, food production will be greatly increased, and the harvest will not be ruined due to hail. With the combined efforts of both parties, it should not be a big problem to get through this winter safely. As for next year, we can only take one step at a time and wait and see. Of course, there is another problem. The national finance must have the money to buy these 500 million pounds of grain. Sure enough, in the second half of the letter, the white gloves mentioned that the first 2 funds were about to be exhausted and asked His Highness to allocate follow-up funds as soon as possible. In addition, they also asked Joseph where the grain piled in the port of Le Havre was going to be shipped to the country. Joseph couldn't help but rub his eyebrows. Transportation was also an extremely troublesome problem. Of course, in the final analysis it is still a matter of money. The transportation capacity in this era is quite poor. Even if you use the cheapest river transportation, the freight will double the price of food. He had previously seen in Varennes' report that nearly half of the 5 million livres used to purchase potatoes in Alsace, Lorraine and other provinces was spent on transportation. This is the result of the government ordering the governors along the route to fully cooperate, otherwise the cost would be even higher. Speaking of river transportation, Joseph suddenly remembered that this year's severe drought will cause some waterways to dry up. At that time, food will have to be transported by land, and the cost will increase several times. Historically, during the Feuillant period, in order to alleviate the food shortage in Paris, they used many means to collect grain from other provinces. In the end, due to the expensive land transportation costs, the grain could not be transported into Paris in time. The lack of bread for the people of Paris was one of the important reasons why the Feuillants resigned. Therefore, it is necessary to transport the food from Le Havre port to various places as soon as possible, while the river transportation is still normal. That's a lot of money again. Joseph calculated it. Paris Fashion Week was about to start, and he should be able to make some money, but the gap was still huge. A large portion of the income of the Paris Angel Company now goes to the Dauphin's Guards Corps, and the remaining amount is only over 200,000 livres per month. The paper mill is still under construction, and it will take at least 3 months to generate profits. The brewing industry itself doesn't charge much in royalties, and it's not the season for large-scale brewing yet. Not to mention the industrial development zone in Nancy, which still needs to continuously invest money. Don't even think about the benefits. Joseph looked at the street scene sweeping backwards outside the car window and sighed inwardly. Money is really easy to spend, but not easy to make. It seems that we need to increase our efforts to increase revenue and reduce expenditure. In terms of open source, I have been doing it myself. The rest are projects that require large investments and have long cycles, making it difficult to generate profits in a short period of time. The other thing is what the current European powers are doing. developing colonies since the age of discovery. Colonies have been a major source of blood for various countries. At the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, it provided a huge amount of resources, and was also a dumping ground for products. Therefore, colonization is definitely the only way for a rich and powerful country to choose. France's current financial predicament is largely due to the fact that after the failure of the 7 Years' War, it ceded large tracts of its colonies to the British, which led to a sharp decline in overseas income. Joseph naturally began to think about suitable places to develop a colony. First of all, the Far East definitely does not have the power to interfere. Historically, it was not until nearly 100 years later that France completed its Industrial Revolution that it re-entered the Far East. America is now almost the sphere of influence of Britain and Spain. Although that place is rich, it is too far away to easily project power. For now, it would be good if the French colonies in the Caribbean could survive. After looking around, he found that the French had historically made the most reasonable choice, and that was North Africa. It is close to France, and has a lot of fertile land, especially Egypt, a world-class strategic location. If Egypt is captured, and the development of the Suez Canal is used to threaten Britain, France will gain great strategic initiative. Note 1 But Joseph frowned immediately. Britain regarded France as its mortal enemy, and kept a close eye on France's every move. As long as France has the momentum to win North Africa, the British will definitely interfere. Historically, as soon as the emperor landed in Egypt, the maritime supply line was cut off by the British. Therefore, if you want to get involved in North Africa, the most important thing is how to hide it from the British. He thought about it for a long time, but still couldn't figure it out, so he had to give up temporarily. Since it was not easy to increase revenue in a short period of time, Joseph began to think about how to reduce expenditure. He recalled France's current large expenditure items, and was surprised to find that the largest expenditure item turned out to be debt interest. The interest to be paid annually exceeds 200 million livres. If we had this money, famine and industrial development would be nothing. However, if the agreement is clearly signed when borrowing the debt, the interest will increase as time goes by. Joseph knew that in just 2 years, the French government would have to pay more than 400 million livres in interest. Note 1. In 1788, the Suez Canal had not yet been developed. Trade from Asia to Europe passed through southern Africa and around the Cape of Good Hope. The range is over 10,000 nautical miles. By taking the Suez Canal, the voyage is only 5,000 nautical miles. So whoever controls the Suez Canal can control European trade. Chapter 140 The real killer weapon. The current situation in France is that as long as we can repay the interest, we have to thank God for his blessing. As for repaying the principal, haha, I don't even dare to think about it in my dreams. Joseph shook his head with a grimace, thinking it would be great if all the banks that provided loans to the government suddenly went bankrupt. In addition to debt interest, France's other major bleeding point is taxation. The French government currently leaves most of its tax collection work to tax collectors. Tax collectors pay a sum of money to the government every year, and then they can collect taxes later. Generations estimated that the actual amount of taxes collected by tax collectors every year was more than 1/8 more than the fees paid to the government. Based on last year's French tax revenue of 500 million livres, 1/8 is 40 million. All this money fell into the pockets of the tax collectors. In fact, the profits of the tax collectors should be more than this. Statistics also show that nearly 20% of the tax revenue has been taken by the tax collectors. In other words, if the tax collector system is abolished, the French government can increase its revenue by at least 40 million livres every year. Of course, tax reform is also very difficult. One of the very important reasons is that the tax collectors are also creditors of the French government. At the beginning of each year, they will pay the tax fees for this year to the government in one lump sum, and then collect taxes. If the tax collector system is suddenly abolished, it will mean that the French government will have no tax revenue for a year. Joseph suddenly discovered that it was not that easy to increase revenue or reduce expenditure right now. While he was thinking about it, the Palace of Versailles square appeared in his sight. Joseph got off the carriage, and the palace official who was summoning Louis XVI came quickly from the car in front, smiling and said, "Your Majesty." Your Majesty said that he is waiting for you at the royal workshop. Joseph nodded to the latter and walked towards the king's lockmaking workshop point. As soon as he walked around the pillar in front of the stairs, he saw a sad-looking man coming towards him. It was Nikkei, the Minister of Household Registration. Nikkei looked up and saw that it was the Crown Prince, and he hurriedly bowed and saluted. "I haven't seen you for a long time, Your Highness the Crown Prince. May the Lord bless you." Joseph smiled at him and was about to ask about signing the Treaty of Eden, but Nikkei said goodbye listlessly. Joseph looked at Emin with some surprise. He seems to have something on his mind. Emin caught up with Nikkei's entourage, asked a few questions in a low voice, and returned to Joseph. "Your Highness, it seems that Count Nikkei was not in a good state when negotiating with the British. Archbishop Brian was there, for I scolded him, so he was a little down." Joseph nodded. It seemed that Nikkei did not have any diplomatic talent. Fortunately, the content of the Anglo-French trade negotiations had been agreed upon by himself and British Ambassador Hartley, and it would not affect the signing of the treaty. When Joseph arrived at the door of the royal workshop, the door opened from the inside, and a middle-aged man with a big face and thick lips wearing a priest's uniform sighed and hobbled out. When the priest saw Joseph, he was slightly startled. He immediately put on a bright smile and greeted the Crown Prince warmly. Seeing the confusion on the Crown Prince's face, Emin hurriedly whispered to the side, "Your Highness, this is Abbot Talleyrand of the St. Denis Abbey." Talleyrand? Joseph blinked. That political tumbler who has been prospering through the major eras of Louis XVI, the National Assembly, the Emperor, and Louis XVIII. Talleyrand served as Archbishop of Autun, and later served as the Emperor's foreign minister and Louis XVIII's prime minister. It's hard to say anything else, but in terms of diplomacy, he is definitely a first-rate master. Joseph smiled and nodded to Talleyrand. Before he could say a few words to him, he heard the voice of Louis XVI coming from the workshop. "Joseph, is it you? Oh, my dear, I have been waiting for you for a long time. Come on in." Talleyrand bowed wisely and excused himself. Joseph stepped into the workshop and saluted Louis XVI with his hands on his chest. Before he could finish his ceremonial words, the king came over excitedly and grabbed him, almost dragging him to the workbench, pointing to something covered with blue cloth on it, and said mysteriously, "Guess, what is this?" Joseph guessed that the flash cap gun might have been completed, but he still cooperated and said in an exaggerated tone, "Is it a pile of jewelry?" 16 shook his head proudly. "No, this is something more precious than jewelry." As he spoke, he pulled open the blue cloth. "It was developed by my favorite son and I. It is the best musket in the world." Immediately, two finely polished flash cap guns that were as beautiful as handicrafts appeared in front of Joseph. "Aren't you going to give it a try?" 16 motioned to the gun. Joseph nodded, reached out and grabbed one of them. Looking at it carefully. The positions of the barrel, trigger, and butt are basically the same as those of the Charleville 1776 flintlock gun, and they should be made of mature parts. The biggest changes are the gun infused chamber. The bolt action was changed from the beak shape of a flintlock gun to the hammer shape. The ignition powder chamber was completely eliminated and turned into a cylindrical protrusion the size of a date pit. Joseph pulled the trigger hard. Louis XVI immediately took out a brass mung bean from the wooden box on the side and stuffed it into his hand. Joseph looked at the flash cap in his hand, then looked at the wooden box, where dozens of flash caps were randomly placed, and thought to himself, "The safety awareness is too poor." Fortunately, there was no fire, otherwise the fun would have been great. He thrust the flash cap onto the fire door. Louis XVI hurriedly pointed to an open space in the corner. "Looks like he's tried there many times." Joseph pointed the muzzle of the gun into the air, pulled the trigger, and there was a pop sound. There was no gunpowder in the gun, and only a little smoke from the burning mercury came out of the muzzle. Joseph could clearly feel from the strength and stability of the gun that there was absolutely nothing wrong with this gun. The best craftsman in France will indeed not disappoint, and he will have another killer weapon in his hands in the future. Artisan XVI seemed not to be satisfied with his performance, muttering, "I thought it could be done a month ago, but I didn't expect the air tightness problem to be very complicated." He gestured toward the Versailles water wheel system outside the window. "If it hadn't been for the British boring machine you recommended, oh, and the spiral micrometer you invented, which was a big help, maybe this gun would still be leaking a little now. You are the best master in the world." Joseph raised the gun in his hand and praised, "If it weren't for you, this gun might not have appeared until decades later." Louis XVI narrowed his eyes with pleasure and then whispered, "Let's go to the woods east of the square to test shooting. I often go there to test guns." Joseph smiled and shook his head. "It's so boring to test guns in the woods. Let's go to the shooting range and shoot a few shots." Chapter 141. Look out for business opportunities everywhere. The father and son smiled knowingly and left immediately. After leaving the workshop, Joseph was about to walk towards the marble courtyard, but saw Louis XVI turning around and going to the tea room. He hurriedly followed and said in surprise, "Father, aren't we going to the shooting range?" "Yes." Shiliu nodded. "While they are preparing the carriage, they can have a cup of tea, eat some snacks, and change clothes at the same time." Joseph then remembered that Louis XVI's super luxurious carriage weighing 5 tons, plus all his travel equipment, could not be prepared in less than 40 minutes. He hurriedly grabbed Chalideo and said, "Dear father, this time you are going to test your work as a firearms master, so you don't have to worry about the etiquette. Why don't you just take my carriage?" Louis XVI blinked. Gunmaster? It seems interesting and stylish. He obeyed the advice and simply changed his clothes, then left the Palace of Versailles and got into his son's grey-black carriage. When the men of the King's Guard saw His Majesty's carriage starting to move, they looked at each other in surprise, hurriedly mounted their horses, and chased after him. Not far after the motorcade had gone, Louis XVI complained, "Joseph, your carriage is too bumpy. If I had known better, I should have waited until my carriage was ready before leaving." Joseph asked a little strangely, "Isn't your carriage bumpy?" "Yes, there are more than 10 sets of springs installed on the chassis of my car." Technical Controller 16 also gave a general explanation of the structure of his car. Spring shock absorber? Joseph was greatly surprised. He had always been thinking about inventing this thing, but he didn't expect that someone had already made it. "Who made your carriage?" "It's the same workshop that built carriages for the palace." Joseph hurriedly inquired in detail, and then he learned that carriages with spring shock absorbers had existed decades ago. It's just that the current springs are rolled out bit by hand. The output is low, and the quality is difficult to guarantee. The springs used in carriages cost 30 livres each, and they broke from time to time, and had to be replaced every 2 or 3 months at most. This resulted in the price of a carriage equipped with spring shock absorbers easily reaching thousands of livres. The King's Special Edition was much more expensive. Of course, people are reluctant to use this kind of carriage. In addition to being expensive, they are also easy to break and troublesome to maintain. The price is so high. There was a smile on Joseph's lips. There were business opportunities everywhere. Why do we have to use springs when a problem can be easily solved with leaf spring suspension? It seems that I can develop a horse-drawn carriage business again. If he had known how valuable this thing was, he should have done it sooner and made his ass suffer for a few more months. Southern suburbs of Paris in the police academy training ground. All the instructors and trainees were in excitement because His Majesty the King suddenly arrived. Accompanied by senior officers of the police academy. Louis XVI smiled and nodded kindly to the trainees. Suddenly he turned his head and asked Joseph in a low voice, "I can't believe you actually built such a big military academy." Joseph quickly corrected with a smile, It's the police academy, where police officers are trained." Louis XVI gestured towards Berthier's regiment, which was lined up in the distance. "Aren't those all soldiers?" Joseph didn't hide it from his father. "Actually, I trained an army to test some military reform ideas. They sometimes come here for training." "Military reform?" Louis XVI said with a smile. "Is it like what the Marquis de Louvois did? The Marquis de Louvois was Louis XIV's Minister of War and led the military reforms at that time, which significantly improved the French army's combat effectiveness. It can be said that the Sun King's reputation was achieved through Louvois' army. However, Louis XVI did not really think that the 14-year-old crown prince could really carry out decent military reforms. Joseph could only vaguely say, it's somewhat similar. I'm so proud of you, my son. Just as Louis XVI was talking, he saw the shooting range not far away. His eyes suddenly lit up, and his feet sped up a bit. When he arrived behind a row of earth walls hundreds of meters wide, instructors had already placed more than a dozen human-shaped wooden boards 40 steps away. 5 steps is about 1 meter, 40 steps is about 26 meters. The instructor knew that it was His Majesty the King who was doing target shooting. So he naturally had to move closer to avoid the embarrassment of His Majesty's continued failure to hit the target point under the watchful eyes of everyone. Louis XVI eagerly took the percussion gun and ammunition bag from the attendant's hand, immediately took out the gunpowder, loaded it, and stamped it, inserted lead bullets, stamped it, then pulled the trigger, and touched the gun. Take out a flash cap, and put it on the fire door. The whole set of actions is extremely skillful, which shows that he has done the loading and firing action too many times recently. In order to build this gun point with a bang, the bullet shot out and hit the shoulder of a wooden target point. The surrounding instructors and followers immediately burst into admiration, but Friant, Dubois and others were all focused on the weird musket point. Joseph looked at the hesitant expressions of several people and smiled at Dubois. Major Dubois, do you want to compare your shooting speed with His Majesty? Dubois has served for more than 10 years and is one of the fastest shooters in the police academy. Seeing that Louis XVI was also eager to give it a try, Dubois immediately touched his chest and nodded. As you wish, Your Highness. He took a Cholville 1776 flintlock gun and hung the ammunition bag on his waist. Joseph then shouted, "Start." The 2 contestants immediately started moving. Dubois was obviously faster, pouring in the gunpowder, pulling out the rod and pestle, and loading the gun. At this time, Louis XVI had just installed the gunpowder. Dubois was leading the way. When he picked up the gunpowder jar and poured it into the ignition chamber, Louis XVI had just filled the gun with bullets. However, when Dubois pulled the trigger and raised the gun to aim, he heard the click sound of the king pulling the trigger. He was suddenly shocked. In other words, His Majesty the King was only less than 2 seconds slower than him. He has been practicing reloading and shooting since he entered the military academy. He has been doing a set of actions for more than 10 years, and he can complete it even with his eyes closed. And His Majesty the King only knows how to use a gun when hunting, and even has servants to help load the ammunition, but now he is only so much slower than him. The 2 guns fired 2 seconds apart, and everyone present, except the king and his son, opened their eyes in surprise. Dubois saluted Louis XVI with his breasts pressed against his chest. He stared at the percussion gun in the latter's hand and said, "Your Majesty, with all due respect, may I have the honor to see your gun?" Of course. 16 handed him the gun and thoughtfully gave him a flash cap. "I want to use this to fire." Joseph then picked up another flash cap gun and told Dubois how to operate it. When the latter learned that this gun omitted the step of pouring igniting gunpowder and required 3 fewer movements than operating a flintlock gun, he was immediately so excited that his breathing became short of breath. "Your Majesty, I can try firing it once." Begging for double monthly tickets. Chapter 14 August 1788 Percussion gun. Afterwards, it was time for the police academy instructors to collectively test fire the flash cap guns. Everyone seemed excited after trying the new gun. They knew very well what it meant, that this gun could increase the firing speed by 3 or 4 seconds. Joseph himself tried to fire a few shots, but felt a huge recoil and the butt of the gun hurt his shoulders. And in terms of reloading speed, even Louis XVI can beat him by a few blocks. Well, the Crown Prince relies on his brain, so let's leave matters like shooting to guess out. Soon, Dean Friant discovered a new advantage of the flash cap gun. "I feel that this gun is more powerful than the 1776 type." Joseph nodded secretly. There was no leakage in the powder chamber. The force of the gunpowder explosion acted more on the bullets, and the power would definitely be improved. An instructor next to him nodded. I feel it too. And when this gun is fired, there is no smoke in the face, and it won't choke the eyes. This is of course also due to the elimination of the ignition chamber. The ignition chamber is close to the face of the gun holder. The leakage of gunpowder gases from here will seriously interfere with the sight, but the flash cap gun does not have this problem. Everyone excitedly discussed while shooting, until all the 70 or 80 flash caps they brought were used up, and then they stopped still. Facts have proved that Louis XVI was very skilled in his craftsmanship. Each gun fired nearly 40 times without any problems. Only His Majesty the King stood aside with a resentful face. He came here to test fire, but only fired 2 shots from start to finish, and he was too scared to open his mouth to ask these strangers for a gun. The empty gun was put away by Louis XVI's bodyguard. Friant looked at Joseph and said, "Your Highness, are these 2 new guns made by Charleville? What are their names?" Charleville is the largest firearms production center in France, and previous new guns were basically developed there. Joseph bowed to Louis XVI and saluted. "No, this gun was made by His Majesty the King himself." Louis XVI smiled shyly and happily. He wanted to add that the gun was designed by the Crown Prince, but social fear made him hesitate, and he couldn't explain clearly for a long time. As for the name of the gun, Joseph thought for a moment. "I suggest calling it the August 1788 flash cap rifle." Everyone shouted the name of the new gun and cheered again. August 1788. The best gun in Europe. This is a new era of muskets. The August 1788. Long live His Majesty the King. Louis XVI's real name was Louis Auguste. Joseph knew very well that the biggest front in the royal family was still his father. Improving his father's prestige would increase the prestige of the entire royal family, and I'm still operating behind the scenes for the time being, so it would be more useful to give my father the fame. Louis XVI was startled for a moment, and when he heard the shouts and praises around him, he suddenly became elated, and then imagined the majestic scene of the gun named after himself sweeping away enemy armies across Europe. The regret of not being able to take more shots just now is gone. Although he felt that he had taken the credit from the Crown Prince, it was hard to live up to his good intentions when his son gave him the naming rights so enthusiastically. Afterwards, Louis XVI, surrounded by everyone, visited the police academy training ground again, saw the police officers' formation drills, and then embarked on the return journey with satisfaction. On the carriage, Shiliu reminisced about this short trip. There was no honor guard like the past, only people's heartfelt praise. This filled him with joy and pleasure. Joseph smiled across from him and said, "Father, I plan to build a firearms manufacturing factory near Paris to produce new flash cap guns. At that time, you will be required to guide the craftsmen in the manufacturing process." New firearms factory? Louis XVI was a little surprised. "Isn't it going to be produced in Charleville?" Joseph subconsciously said. "This gun is an important means of controlling the military." Of course. Louis XVI's eyes were bright and clear. "Control the military? But the military is very loyal to me." Joseph secretly raised his forehead and didn't know what to tell his father. "If you really had control over the military, you wouldn't have been unable to transfer even an army to Paris at that time." He had to change his words. "Loyal to you? Ah, yes, of course. It's just that the processing technology of the flash cap gun is complicated. At present, you are the only one who has mastered all the processes. We can't let you go to Charleville to teach other craftsmen, right? So it is best to produce it directly near Paris. By the way, there will be other new weapons that you need to research and manufacture in the future. The manufacturing plant will be next to the Palace of Versailles, which will be more convenient." 16 was immediately convinced and nodded slightly. "A new manufacturing plant will cost a lot of money. Well, I can spare 500,000 livres right now. Is that enough?" Joseph felt moved in his heart. Such a good employee who funds research and development. "Ah, no. Where can I find a good father?" he hurriedly said. "It should be enough. Even if it is not enough, I will add a little more." "Oh, By the way, you will have to send people to the firearms factories in Charleville and St. Dié to recruit some skilled craftsmen as soon as possible. Start making new guns. Joseph calculated correctly that if His Majesty the King personally summoned him, he would be able to come and live in the bustling Paris. Those craftsmen would definitely not be able to refuse this temptation point in this way. Your arsenal can be put into operation in the shortest possible time point when the flash cap gun is manufactured. The combat effectiveness of your own guards corps will immediately surpass all of Europe. He then thought that a truly strong army cannot stay in the training ground forever. Only the smoke of the battlefield can make them grow quickly. Speaking of which, North Africa is a good training ground, not as strong as the European army, but not as weak as the Native Americans. But how can we bypass the British and intervene in North Africa? A few hours later, the motorcade entered the palace square of Versailles. The carriage belonged to Joseph, and he had to send Louis XVI back first. In addition, he also wanted to talk to Brian about food in North Africa. As soon as the father and son got off the carriage, Joseph saw a figure in a priest's uniform waiting respectfully outside the gate, but Louis XVI frowned, lowered his head, and pretended not to see it, and walked over quickly. Joseph caught a glimpse of the priest's lonely expression, and asked in a low voice, "Father, is there something wrong with Dean Talleyrand?" 16 sighed. "It's about his promotion to archbishop." "Well, what then? His qualifications are sufficient, and the church also agrees. However, your mother was dissatisfied that he had talked about her privately, so she refused to sign for him. He always came to beg me." Joseph nodded secretly. Talleyrand was definitely a talent, and now was a good opportunity to make him his own. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 143, Letter from Catherine II. Joseph looked in the direction of Talleyrand again, and said to Louis XVI, "Father, if he comes to bother you again, just let him come to me. I have a way to convince him." When Louis XVI heard that he could get rid of the persistent priest, he naturally agreed happily. "Thank you very much, Joseph." As he spoke, he remembered the honor and praise that the flash cap gun had brought him today, and couldn't help but look at his son with unfulfilled interest. "Joseph, if you have any ideas for new weapons, please tell me immediately." Joseph smiled and nodded, saying in his heart that you will definitely not be able to relax. Any more day you are free will be a huge loss to France's armament modernization. Recently, you first taught the craftsmen how to make flash cap guns. I do have an idea about a rifled gun, but it's not mature enough yet. I will tell you after I think about it for a while. Of course, the principle and structure of the rifled gun are ready-made, but Joseph was afraid that his father's focus on it would affect the construction progress of the arsenal, so he had no choice but not to tell him yet. Rifled gun? Louis XVI was a little confused. Didn't someone make this a long time ago? Joseph smiled and waved his hands, deliberately lowering his voice, and said, "It is very difficult to load the current rifled gun. The bullet has to be hammered into the barrel, and it may even get stuck in the middle of the barrel. My rifled gun is designed to be loaded very easily. It's almost like a musket." Louis XVI's eyes suddenly lit up. What kind of brain did you give my Joseph?" He grabbed his son's arm tightly and said excitedly, "Then you have to hold on tighter. By then we will be able to build a gun that will shock the whole of Europe." "Okay, dear father." After chatting for a while about the glorious moment at the training ground today, Joseph said goodbye to the proud king and went straight to the Chancellor's office. Brian hurriedly came out and smiled warmly. "Your Royal Highness, it's great to see that your injury has healed. Thank you God for your blessing." He was indeed very concerned about Joseph's injury. He used to visit him almost every day, just for fear that something might happen to the crown prince. Joseph hurriedly made a sign of the cross on his chest. "Thank you God. Thank you also, Archbishop Brian." The Two sat down, and Joseph remembered the meeting with the Minister of Household Registration yesterday, and asked, Archbishop Bryant, it is said that Count Nicode's trip to the UK did not go so smoothly this time. Brian sighed and nodded. Yes, he is indeed not very good at that kind of situation. He is slow to respond to various diplomatic methods and often says the wrong things. Oh, he even got the genealogy of the King of England wrong in public. He paused, looked at Joseph and said, moreover, we gave Versin such a big humiliation, but he came to report to me about going to Russia, as if he didn't feel anything. Not to mention resigning. Joseph also frowned a little when he heard this. He had previously agreed with Brian to kick Foreign Minister Versin to Russia and miss the Anglo-French trade negotiations, thinking that he would resign in anger. But I didn't expect that his determination was so strong. In fact, Versin wanted to resign before he even arrived in Russia, but the Duke of Orleans repeatedly asked him to stay in office. He had no choice but to keep a shy face and continue to hang out in the cabinet. Because he is Orleans' only political ally in the cabinet currently. Losing him is absolutely unacceptable to Orleans. Brian was a little confused. Your Highness, if Virgin doesn't leave Count Nicode's side. Joseph knew that according to the original agreement when deposing Brian, Nicode was to be made Minister of Foreign Affairs. He shook his head slightly. Count Nicode is not suitable for diplomacy either. Well, I'll find a way to compensate him. What are you going to do, Count? Nicode is still better at household registration. Let him start planning the ID card system. ID card. Joseph smiled and said, it is to issue a card to every French citizen. There is a unique number on it to distinguish each person's identity. Why are you sending this? Brian was able to sit on the position of chief minister after all. He thought of the key point just halfway through the sentence. You can collect a poll tax based on this. There are many other benefits, Joseph said. For example, it can be used to screen spies and wanted criminals. It can prevent fake claims for relief. It can facilitate identification, prevent fraud, etc. Of course, Joseph wanted to promote ID cards mainly for the convenience of taxation and trade. In the future, he could also use this to enhance national identity in the colonies. Brian nodded. Count Nicode has always wanted to do something eye-catching, and this matter will involve everyone in the country. He should be satisfied. Joseph added, you can even add the signature of the Minister of Family Registration on the ID card to confirm the validity of the document. That would be perfect. Joseph thought of Vilsin again and couldn't help but frowned. We have to continue to ignore Vilsin, and the foreign minister must be replaced by one of our people. Brian immediately nodded gratefully. Thank you, Your Highness. From his point of view, Versin offended himself because of the recall case, and that's why the Crown Prince would not tolerate him so much. In fact, Joseph was more concerned with integrating the political territory and minimizing the power of the Duke of Orleans, paving the way for the rectification of the old aristocracy in the future. Speaking of Versin, Brian remembered his report a few days ago and hurriedly said to Joseph, Your Highness, Versin did bring back some news from his mission to Russia. He stood up and took out a few pieces of paper from the drawer and handed them to Joseph. The Empress of Russia is very concerned about our concerns about the Russian-Turkish war. She repeatedly told Vilsin that it was Ottoman who initiated the war and attempted to invade Russian territories, Crimea and Georgia, and attack the Russian fleet. They fought back as a last resort. Oh, this is a copy of a letter from Empress Catherine to His Majesty the King. Joseph didn't care who was right or wrong between Russia and Turkey. The point is that the situation there can be exploited by France. He looked at Catherine's letter and saw that the Queen spoke very politely about the friendship between Russia and France, and then encouraged France to support her and declare war on the Ottomans. It is even said that this can be regarded as a new crusade led by France. Brian added, according to Vilsin, the Russian Empress also hinted to him the possibility of a Russian-French marriage. Joseph smiled. Marriage with Russia would not bring any substantial benefits to France for the time being. However, when he saw the sentence support Russia's war against the Ottomans, he couldn't help but narrowed his eyes. Speaking of it, Algiers Tunisia, Egypt, etc. from west to east in North Africa, although in essence they are all an independent country, but still nominally an Ottoman province. If France allied with Russia to resist Turkey, wouldn't there be a reason to intervene in North Africa as part of the attack on the Ottomans? Chapter 144 Foreign Policy. Moreover, with Russia's concerns, if the British interfere with France's actions in North Africa, Russia will first protest against the British. Joseph returned the letter to Brian. What do you think of what it says? The latter considered, uniting with Russia will not bring much benefit to us in the short term, but in the future it may be used to suppress countries such as Austria and Prussia, and even have a certain influence on the British. Joseph secretly thought that Brian seemed to have a good political vision, and he knew that the result of this Russo-Turkish war would be a complete victory for Russia and force the Ottomans to sign the Peace of Versailles. Since then, the entire northern coast of the Black Sea has been owned by Russia. Historically, Austria was the first to stand up for Russia, and thus gained huge political and strategic benefits, and this time, Joseph must not let this benefit fall into the hands of others. He nodded immediately and said, I agree with your point of view. Therefore, at the next cabinet meeting, you can ask someone to propose a proposal to unite Russia and be tough on the Ottomans. In fact, declaring war on the Ottomans can also be one of the options. Okay, Your Highness, I will get started. After a series of previous incidents, Brian has basically obeyed Joseph's words. After talking about the international situation, Brian naturally talked about domestic affairs and said in an admiring tone, Your Highness, I have read the report on potato sowing in various provinces across the country. I really don't know how you convinced those people to plant so many potatoes. Now this year's food should be very abundant. Joseph sighed silently. It's good if you can barely have enough to eat. How can there be enough? He hurriedly ordered. Archbishop Brian, although the potatoes have been planted, we still need to pay attention to irrigation to fight the drought. If possible, I suggest that each parish be equipped with some steam pumps. Only one of these things can be used. It can irrigate dozens of hectares of land. Parishes in France are actually administrative units of villages and towns. Joseph's suggestion was not without purpose. Although there are few large coal mines in France, there are many small coal mines scattered throughout the country. As long as it is supplemented by appropriate mining policies, it is easy to meet the civilian coal needs of villages and towns on this basis. It can also promote the sales of steam engines and form a virtuous cycle. Brian muttered, the parishes near Paris may be okay, but the more remote ones may not be able to afford this money. Joseph recalled the situation of the farmer Gazka's family and nodded slightly. Some small parish banks can be established to specifically provide loans to farmers. However, these banks need to limit interest rates to prevent them from becoming tools to exploit farmers. Brian nodded immediately and said, your suggestion is very good. I will let people formulate policies later. Joseph thought about the problem of grain transportation again and continued to give instructions. Also, we have to consider that food cannot be transported during the dry season. So, I suggest that major cities should establish strategic grain reserve warehouses, set up official management and regular storage, withdrawal and inspection mechanisms. By the way, Paris in particular should build 2 more. France has always been a major grain producing country in Europe, and it had no idea of developing grain reserves before. Brian was a little confused. Your Highness, there is not much food now. Even if the food depot is built, it will be empty. I'm already thinking of ways to get food. You just need to issue decrees to the governors of each province as soon as possible. Although Brian felt that with a large amount of potatoes, this year's food crisis should be able to be successfully overcome. He did not understand why the Crown Prince was still so cautious. However, out of his absolute trust in Joseph, he still agreed. When Joseph came out of Brian's place, it was almost dinner time, so he had to stay in Versailles for the night. When he returned to the Dauphin's palace after dinner with the Queen, he saw Talleyrand waiting there respectfully. This is a very capable person, and with his clever mind, it is no wonder that he has survived several dynasties. Joseph made some comments in his mind and nodded to Talleyrand, who came forward to salute. Please sit down, Dean Talleyrand. What's the matter with you coming to me so late? Your Majesty, His Majesty the King says you are the only one who can save me. Talleyrand then recounted the obstacles in his promotion to Archbishop. In words, he was treated unfairly, as pitifully as a homeless kitten on a snowy day, but he did not say a word against Queen Mary. Joseph also admired his language skills. No wonder he became the strongest diplomat during the emperor's period. However, Joseph did not play tricks with him and asked directly, "Why did you make Her Majesty the Queen unhappy?" Talleyrand was slightly startled, reacted quickly, and sighed, "Your Highness, you know that there were many rumors about the Queen before. I was very stupid to believe some of them, and told others about this. Let Her Majesty the Queen know the matter." Joseph secretly thought, "It seems that the matter is not too serious. When it comes to making the Queen happy, I'm still somewhat confident. When the time comes, say a few good words to Talleyrand and the matter should be resolved." So he looked at Talleyrand and said, "I can help you with this." "Really?" The latter was so excited that he almost cried, "Your Highness, you are really an angel sent by God to save the world." Joseph hurriedly raised his hand to stop him from continuing to fart. "This is nothing, Dean Talleyrand. However, His Majesty the King has been worrying about your affairs. You should really thank him." Yes, Your Majesty always cares about me." Talleyrand looked at Joseph with searching eyes. "Well, how can I thank Your Majesty? Can you give me some advice?" Joseph smiled slightly. "I heard that Your Majesty is going to build a firearms manufacturing factory recently." Talleyrand nodded thoughtfully. The next day, Joseph personally ordered the palace pastry chef to make more than 10 exquisite desserts, and took them to the Little Trianon Palace. Queen Mary looked at the various cakes, puddings, and snacks on the table. With little stars in her eyes, Joseph picked up a piece of puff pastry cake and fed it to the Queen. While she was happy, he talked about Talleyrand. The Queen held her well-behaved and intelligent son in her arms, so she didn't care about Talleyrand. She heard Joseph say a few good words for Talleyrand, especially when he mentioned that he wanted to use this man to do something for the country, and she readily promised her son that she would not care about the latter's previous mistakes. All the best. Joseph immediately sent for Talleyrand. After the priest used his extraordinary eloquence and acting skills to solemnly apologize to the Queen expressed her forgiveness for him. Talleyrand breathed a sigh of relief and withdrew. Coming out of the Queen's place, Joseph saw Talleyrand waiting at the entrance of the Little Trianon. The priest came over and burst into tears of gratitude. He had been looking for Louis XVI for more than a year, but could not solve the problem. Unexpectedly, the Dauphin solved it with just a table of desserts without Joseph's intervention. It was not until the death of Talleyrand's father at the end of the year that he was promoted to Archbishop at the mercy of the Queen. Joseph seemed to ask casually, "By the way, Dean Talleyrand, how much do you know about the situation in North Africa?" Chapter 145. I'll eat you, Barbary pirate. North Africa? Talleyrand didn't seem to expect that the Crown Prince would suddenly mention this, and was slightly stunned. "You know something about the situation, Your Highness. What do you want to hear?" "Anything will do. The more detailed the better." Talleyrand lamely followed Joseph and considered. North Africa is roughly located on the southern shore of the Mediterranean. From west to east there are Morocco, Algiers, Tunisia, Tripoli, Egypt and several other countries. What do you say about these places? Except for Morocco, the others may not be considered countries. They can change between Ottoman provinces and countries at any time according to the needs of different situations. He suddenly realized that the Crown Prince probably did not want him to talk about these basic geographical concepts, and quickly changed the perspective of political system. Morocco is currently under the rule of the Alauid dynasty. However, in recent decades, rebellions have often broken out there, and the struggle is also very fierce, and their sultans often die violently just a few years after coming to power. In short, Morocco is now very weak, and has to rely on sending pirates to rob merchant ships in the Mediterranean to maintain its finances. Talleyrand quickly glanced at the crown prince and saw that he was very interested, and then continued. On the east side of Morocco, there is Algiers, a city founded by pirates 200 years ago. Oh, maybe it can also be called they were built for the Ottoman navy, which was pretty much it anyway. Those pirates controlled the Berbers who originally lived in Algiers, but faced tremendous pressure from the Spanish navy. So they voluntarily became an Ottoman province in order to gain Ottoman support. After that, Ottoman sent an elite imperial army there. After hundreds of years, Ottoman has lost control of distant Algiers. The imperial army stationed there became the ruler. Currently, the imperial army in Algiers, the pirates and locals formed a parliament, which elected the governor of Algiers. Oh, by the way, their navy, what we think of as pirates, is very powerful in Algiers. There are several governors there who were pirates. Joseph smiled and nodded. You are very detailed. Please continue. Oh, okay, Your Highness. Adjacent to the east of Algiers is Tunisia. Although it is not a large area, it is very rich. Almost the whole country is fertile land and rich in products. But Tunisia only ended its nearly half-century of repeated coups 20 years ago. Now the Pasha there, sort of governor, is Hamad Bey. Due to the previous war, Tunisia has lost its former prosperity, and because Algiers participated in Tunisia's previous coup, the relationship between the two sides is extremely bad. Algiers often plunders the Tunisian border, but our textiles, glass, wine and other goods are very popular in Tunisia. That is the largest market in North Africa. Of course, Tunisia is also one of the home bases of Barbary pirates. Our merchant ships are robbed from time to time. The navy needs to go there frequently to clean up. Actually, we are pretty good. After all, Toulon has a powerful fleet stationed there. Merchant ships from Denmark, Sardinia, and the United States have been robbed more. Oh, in order to protect themselves from pirates, the Americans pay millions of livres in tribute to the pirates every year. Joseph frowned. Why do I hear you always mention pirates? Oh, yes, Your Highness. Talleyrand nodded. The Mediterranean was originally a paradise for Barbary pirates. They used to be part of the Ottoman navy, responsible for attacking merchant ships in Catholic countries. But then the Ottomans were not as powerful as before, and they gradually lost control of the navy. Those navies also became pirates. They established strongholds all over North Africa, or even ruled directly as governor, as in Algiers. The Barbary pirates have received formal naval training, so they are far more powerful than ordinary pirates. They roam the Mediterranean and attack all merchant ships, unless the country, where the ship is located, has paid tribute to them. Every year, European countries have to spend a lot of money to redeem the hostages taken by pirates. By the way, Barbary pirates would also attack the European areas in the northern Mediterranean, take the residents there as slaves, and sell them to North Africa, the Ottomans, or the Arab areas. The Spanish Navy has repeatedly attacked Barbary pirates for hundreds of years, but the pirates are rooted in various North African countries. Tripoli is also one of their bases, so it is impossible to eliminate them, as Talleyrand repeatedly mentioned the Barbary pirates. Joseph suddenly remembered that the famous Barbary War would break out more than 10 years later. The Americans couldn't stand being plundered by the Barbary pirates, so almost all naval forces were sent to the Mediterranean to fight pirates. However, it was not until decades later that the Barbary pirates were completely eliminated with the assistance of France. During this period, the United States once spent 20% of its national fiscal revenue to pay pirate ransoms. Joseph's eyes suddenly lit up, and he patted Talleyrand on the shoulder excitedly. Thank you for the reminder, Dean Talleyrand. I think it's time for us to make up our minds to eliminate these scourges of the Mediterranean. He had always adhered to the historical route of the Emperor's march into North Africa, which was to start from Egypt. But currently France is not powerful enough to get involved in Egypt, and the Ottomans are still strong, so they will definitely reinforce Egypt. Egypt is still nominally an Ottoman operation. Province Point. The Barbary pirates Provided Joseph with new ideas, you can definitely start with the Barbary pirates, attack the pirate strongholds in North Africa, and then turn the pirates' territory into trophies. Moreover, eradicating pirates is something that everyone hopes for, especially Americans who have suffered deeply from it, and will definitely support it strongly. It is estimated that the Spaniards will also contribute point in this case. If the British wanted to interfere, first of all, they would have no excuse. They couldn't say I oppose the elimination of the Barbary pirates, right? Secondly, he will also offend the United States and Spain. If France and Russia join forces to deal with the Ottomans, Russia will definitely support France's actions in the Mediterranean point. If Britain really wants to go its own way, it might be able to form an anti-British alliance or something like that, which would make a lot of money. Point in this way, France's North Africa strategy gradually took shape on the field path outside the petted Trianon point. Talleyrand was very confused and said, "Your Highness, the Barbary pirates are huge, and it will take a lot of money to eradicate them. With France's current financial situation, I'm afraid." Joseph smiled and shook his head. "No, Dean Talleyrand, this attack on pirates will only make money, not much money." He stopped and looked at Talleyrand. "Perhaps you are willing to accept a diplomatic position." Chapter 146, Buses and New Shock Absorbing Systems. Talleyrand immediately showed a look of surprise. "I will obey your orders in everything, Your Highness." Joseph nodded. "I hope you can serve as a diplomatic advisor and go to the United States." Okay, I'm willing to go. "Thank you, Your Highness." Talleyrand did not expect that in addition to gaining the Queen's understanding today, he would also have this unexpected gain point. At this time in France, after the Jesuits were banned, the church had completely transformed into the Ministry of Education and the Bureau of Civil Affairs, plus some relief work. Although it had a lot of wealth, it no longer had any real power. Therefore, the priests all sharpened their heads and wanted to serve in the government. That would be the real way to stand out. The leader among them is Archbishop Brian Point, and Joseph could give Talleyrand a position with real power, which would be a huge boost. Point, of course, Joseph also valued his diplomatic skills, and it happened that after overthrowing Wilhelm, a diplomatic person could take over. He motioned Talleyrand to continue moving forward. "I need you to go to the United States as soon as possible to unite with them to fight against the Barbary pirates. Of course, it comes at a cost to them." Talleyrand suddenly understood why the Dauphin had just said, "Fighting pirates will only make money." Joseph continued, "The tribute they now pay to the pirates every year should be more than 1 million livres." "Yes, Your Highness," Talleyrand said hurriedly, "about $220,000 At this time, the US dollar was anchored to gold coins, and $1 could be exchanged for approximately 5 livres. Joseph nodded, "plus the ransom of their kidnapped merchant ship crew." Talleyrand said, "It is said that last year they paid more than $130,000 to redeem captured sailors. The total is more than 1.7 million livres." Joseph smacked his lips. "Let them pay 1/3, 600,000 livres per year, as the cost of the French Navy assisting them in combating piracy." Talleyrand's eyes twitched. Wasn't the Crown Prince trying to eliminate the pirates? Why did he turn to assisting the Americans in a blink of an eye? But he immediately showed his qualities as a diplomat and nodded solemnly. "This amount is very reasonable, Your Highness." Besides, Joseph really wanted to get back the tens of millions of livres loaned by Louis XVI when he supported the American War of Independence, but the money was subject to an agreement and the repayment deadline was far from coming. The Americans took French loans and supplies, plus the support of the French army, to defeat the British. But after they became independent, they turned around and flirted with the British, which greatly undermined France's strategy of weakening the British. Point, thinking of his father's poverty and generosity, Joseph felt a little resentful that iron could not become steel. Point, he thought for a moment and said, "Let the Americans return the tens of thousands of flintlock guns that they provided to them back then. There is no agreement signed on this batch of supplies, and we have the right to take them back. By the way, the matching gunpowder and lead bullets are all got to bring it." What supported the Americans at that time was the latest model Charleville 1763. "These guns may also be worth some money." Talleyrand's eyes twitched again. The crown prince should go into the loan industry, and he would definitely make a lot of money. Joseph continued to order, let the Americans transport these guns directly to Russia. They will pay for the freight. Huh? Russia? Joseph nodded. You will also follow the gun to Russia. I will send another senior diplomat to submit a note to their queen, indicating that we can join forces to deal with the Ottoman position. You will then assist in diplomatic work to win Russia's support for us in the Mediterranean. Action support. Oh, that batch of guns is used to show our sincerity in supporting Russia's war against the Ottomans. Of course, the Queen can express her gratitude with millions of pounds of potatoes. Russia will pay for the shipping. Russo-Turkish war? Mediterranean? Potato? Talleyrand was extremely smart, and it took him a few seconds to figure out the connection clearly. His eyes when he looked at the crown prince were full of shock. This set of operations connects unrelated world situations together and becomes his own help. It didn't cost a penny to please the Russians. What was even more unbelievable to him was that, judging by the crown prince's tone, these important national affairs would be carried out in accordance with his wishes. The crown prince actually has such great influence in the cabinet. He hurriedly bowed and said, "Yes, your highness, I understand what to do." Joseph smiled again and said, "If you can prove your ability during this mission, I can consider promoting you to a more suitable position." Talleyrand was immediately moved and searched for all the words he could think of, expressing that he would be loyal to his highness and do his best to complete his highness's orders in a carriage manufacturing workshop in Paris. Joseph pointed to a semi-finished carriage with the bottom upward and said to several craftsmen beside him, "Just leave one spring here and remove the others." A middle-aged craftsman immediately whispered nervously, your majesty, this kind of luxury carriage must have good shock absorption. If only 2 springs are used." Joseph smiled and said, "It doesn't matter, just use leaf springs instead." The middle-aged craftsman said with a grimace, "Your highness, leaf springs are only used on ordinary carriages. They have poor shock absorption." "What kind of leaf spring are you talking about?" Joseph pointed to a black carriage being installed next to him. The bottom of the car's body was equipped with 2 steel bars as wide as the palm of your hand and nearly 2 meters long to support the body and achieve shock absorption. The craftsman nodded. Joseph picked up a pen and paper and explained as he drew, "That kind of leaf spring is too primitive. Like this, stack 4 steel bars of different lengths together, fix them, and then put the wheel axle in the middle of the steel bars. A set of these steel bars should be added to each wheel. By the way, medium carbon steel should be used. It has moderate hardness and toughness. You can try a few more and decide which one to use." The youngest craftsman showed an expression of sudden realization. "That's right. If 1 steel bar is not enough, use 4. If 2 sets of steel bars are not enough, use 4 sets. This will achieve better shock absorption effect." The middle-aged craftsman previously added, "We used to use leaf springs to carry the car body, but we never thought that they should be used directly on the wheels. In this way, when the road surface on both sides is uneven, the wheels on both sides can be lifted to different heights to reduce the risk of damage." The car's body tilted. Seeing that the craftsman roughly understood the principle, Joseph then ordered, "Please make the entire leaf spring system as soon as possible. Before next week's Paris Fashion Week, this leaf spring must be used for shock absorption on buses." The carriage has basically been built. If the springs are replaced with leaf springs, more than a week should be enough. Joseph added, "As long as the bus is not delayed, you will be able to receive 2 more months' wages." The craftsmen suddenly became excited and clapped their chests to express that they would complete the carriage on time. After Joseph thought of the business opportunity of carriages a few days ago, he immediately spent more than 100,000 livres to acquire a well-known car dealership in Paris. The cost came from the money to build a firearms manufacturing factory. Talleyrand, in order to thank His Majesty the King for his support for his promotion to Archbishop, spent 200,000 livres to sponsor the King's construction of the factory. As a result, the funds originally given by Louis XVI were misappropriated by Joseph. Chapter 147 Preparing to declare war. Leaf springs are a very mature thing nowadays. Joseph just asked the craftsmen to change their usage, so the technical aspects were quickly finished with the craftsman. Joseph came out of the carriage workshop and told his newly appointed workshop manager, Mr. Laspiner, your most important task next is to recruit skilled craftsmen as soon as possible. You can also spend more money to dig them from other workshops. Okay, your highness, I will definitely do it. The manager from Parma nodded hurriedly and cautiously. Joseph continued, after the trial production of the new leaf spring shock absorbers is completed, our workshop will only manufacture the chassis, and all the carriages will be customized from other carriage workshops, using the most luxurious materials and accessories. Laspiner said carefully, your highness, the cost will be very high. Don't worry about the cost, we will have a high enough profit. Joseph smiled and then ordered, remember, the bodies of all carriages must be engraved with royal certification, and the tails of the carriages should be engraved with the same chassis as the royal carriage. Write the word chassis smaller. Obtaining a royal certification is very simple for Joseph, just say hello to his mother. As for the queen, same style, you need to give your father a carriage made by yourself, and let him sit in it, and go for a few laps. Of course, if the chassis can only be of the same model and the carriages are exactly the same, the palace officials will definitely give their opinions. The next step is to increase investment in advertising. I will say hello to the Paris Business Journal and give you the best page. Paris Fashion Week is coming soon. You must seize this opportunity to make our carriages a trend among the nobles. Joseph is still very confident about the sales prospects of the carriage. He copied the shock absorbing structure of later generations of small trucks. In terms of comfort, it can be as good as the current spring shock absorbing, but the cost is only 1/10 of the latter. Therefore, more money can be spent on increasing the luxury of the cabin. Even so, the cost of the entire vehicle is much lower than using spring shock absorbers, which means that the selling price will be reduced accordingly. At present, carriages with spring shock absorbers can only be afforded by a small number of extremely wealthy people. They are definitely synonymous with ultra luxury, basically equivalent to the level of Maybach and Porsche in later generations. Joseph planned to set the price of the new carriage at about 60% of that of a spring-damped carriage, which would roughly bring it down to the price of later generations of Mercedes-Benz and BMW. Those aristocrats who cannot afford ultra luxury will definitely be crazy about this royal certified carriage that looks more upscale than the ultra luxury carriage and has the same level of comfort. The only thing that worries Joseph is the production capacity of the workshop. If demand exceeds supply, consider opening the patent to other workshops for a fee. This time it is not like the winemaking technology, which only charges 3% of the patent licensing fee. At that time, it was to attract plantation owners to grow potatoes, but the horse-drawn carriage was a purely commercial operation, and the patent fee had to be at least 30%. The next day, in the conference hall of the East Palace of Versailles, the cabinet meeting was proceeding step by step. Is that enough? Queen Mary handed back the document appointing Talleyrand as senior diplomatic advisor to Brian, and her name was already signed on it. Brian nodded respectfully. Yes. Thank you, your majesty. None of the ministers here cared much about a priest, and the diplomatic advisor was not an important position, so after Brian made the appointment proposal, it was immediately approved. Archbishop Brian put away the appointment document and signaled his assistants to distribute copies of Catherine II's letter to everyone present. Although this is a letter, the content is actually a diplomatic document and there is nothing that needs to be kept confidential. Brian Dao. The origin of this Russo-Turkish war was last year when the Ottoman Empire demanded that Russia return Crimea and attacked a Russian frigate. The current battle situation is that the Ottoman army has repeatedly attacked Kimbun port, but was repelled by the Russian army. Especially at the end of last year, the main force of the Ottoman offensive was almost completely wiped out by the Suvorov army, and the attack was temporarily suspended. And Russia, on the other hand, legions and battleships are being assembled. Foreign Minister Ersin, who had just returned from Russia, added, according to the news I heard in St. Petersburg, the Russian Empress is very determined this time and is ready to capture Ochakov in one fell swoop. Ochakov is a strategic location between Russia and Turkey. No matter who wants to attack the other party, they must go here first. At the same time, it is also an important military port overlooking the Black Sea. Brian continued, at present, Austria is likely to support Russia and send troops to attack the Ottomans. Sweden, on the other hand, is mobilizing troops and seems to be preparing to support the Ottomans from the north and attack Russia. Queen Mary frowned slightly, as if saying to herself, "So, Your Majesty, although her mid-eye has carried out military reforms and made full preparations, judging from the previous wars, Russia still has the advantage." Brian was busy analyzing for her, and St. Petersburg's attitude is very hopeful. We can join the fight against the Ottomans, and they should be willing to pay something for it. The mid-eye is the current Ottoman Sultan. Brian and Joseph looked at each other and then said, "If we intervene in the Russian-Turkish war, now would be a good time." The Queen was a little confused, "But our army has to cross Austria and travel 4,000 sea miles to reach Crimea." Joseph interjected, "Your Majesty, we don't have to go to Crimea. Sweden can support its allies in the north of Russia, and we can also take action on the west side of the Ottomans." His Royal Highness the Crown Prince is right, Brian said. "As long as we show our strength in the direction of the Mediterranean, we can greatly restrict the Ottoman deployment." When the Minister of the Navy heard that he was going to take action in the Mediterranean, he immediately became interested. "I agree with Archbishop Brian's point of view. If we only go to the Gulf of Sirte and get Russia's gratitude, this is a very cost-effective strategy." Joseph sighed secretly, "What are you always thinking about? Where is the military spending now for you to show off your power around the Ottomans? Wouldn't it be nice to make some money near the Barbary Sea?" The Gulf of Sirte is in the southeast of the Mediterranean Sea, close to the southern coast of the Ottoman Empire. Although it poses a great threat to the Ottoman Empire, it is also far away from France. At present, it is impossible for France to really attack the Ottoman mainland, otherwise it will be helping Russia to draw chestnuts from the fire. The Barbary Sea is in the central and western part of the Mediterranean Sea, close to the southern coast of France, and North Africa to the south. This is where France's interests lie. He hurriedly said, "Marquis of Castries, our operational target this time should be the Ottoman naval power in the western Mediterranean." The Ottoman Navy is in the western Mediterranean. The Navy Minister took a full 2 seconds to react. "Are you talking about the Barbary pirates?" "Yes." Joseph nodded, "Including their naval base." Chapter 148 The Professional Qualities of a Diplomat. The Minister of the Navy reacted again, and realized that the naval bases the Crown Prince was talking about were Algiers, Tunisia and other places where Barbary pirates were entrenched. However, the impact on the Ottomans in the Barbary Sea area is limited, and the Gulf of Sirte is more. Seeing that he was still entangled, Joseph quietly gave Brian a look. The latter immediately coughed lightly and said, "Marquis of Castries, you know, our finances are very tight, so there is no additional allocation for this operation. No funding." Upon hearing this, the Minister of the Navy immediately stopped and muttered, "But even if we show our strength near the Barbary Sea, we still need funds." Joseph smiled and said, "So, we have to bring the United States and Spain together to carry out joint operations." Queen Mary looked at her son with interest. "Joseph, why do you want Americans and Spanish?" "Because the Americans can pay," Joseph said. "Their merchant ships in the Mediterranean are often attacked by the Ottoman Navy, so they can spend 600,000 livres and let us help protect the safety of the merchant ships. Oh, by the way, since there is a joint operation, the United States also needs some decent warships. I believe they will be willing to buy 2 frigates or the like from us." The United States today is not the world's policeman in the future. They have just founded the country, are as poor as ghosts, and have almost zero navy. Sell them 2 old French frigates, and for them, they are absolute battleships. The Queen nodded and said, "What about the Spaniards? They can send out warships. Spain has a lot of interests in the Barbary Sea, and they want to expel the Ottoman forces there more than we do." Brian lost no time in echoing, "Your Majesty, I think the plan proposed by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince is very practical." Queen Mary nodded happily. The Americans contributed money, the Spanish contributed efforts, and France won the benefits of Russia. Is there anything more cost effective than this? She turned to look at Brian. "Archbishop Brian, Please make a detailed plan for uniting Russia to fight against the Ottomans and operations in the Mediterranean, and submit it to me as soon as possible. Yes, Your Majesty. In fact, the corresponding plan has been formulated. Brian placed a thick stack of documents in front of the Queen. Oh, it's amazing how efficient you are. Thank you for the compliment. Brian smiled and continued, I plan to let Viscount Leonidas go to Russia as the representative of His Majesty the King. If the conditions given by the Russian Empress are suitable, we can even agree to send an envoy to the Ottoman Empire. Declare war. Queen Mary was about to nod, but Foreign Minister Wilson frowned and said, Archbishop Brian, it was I who brought back Queen Catherine's letter last time. Why should I change it to Viscount Leonidas this time? Brian said, of course, to prevent this diplomatic credit from falling into your hands. But on the surface, he said seriously, Count Verson, there are other more important things to leave to you. Oh. Is there anything more important right now than sending an envoy to Russia? You will go to Constantinople on behalf of His Majesty the King of France. Constantinople was the Ottoman capital of Constantinia, which later became Istanbul. However, Constantinia is what the Turks called it after they occupied it. People in Catholic countries still like to use the name given by the Romans. Constantinople. Virgin was startled. What are you going to do in Constantinople? This is very important. Brian said seriously, we must minimize the possibility of Ottoman turning his attention to the Mediterranean. So, you are going to show Hamidai that we are here to protect free trade in the Mediterranean and combat Barbary pirates. Several cabinet ministers were amused in their hearts when they heard this. Just now they had vowed to attack the Ottoman navy, but in the blink of an eye they became Barbary pirates. Wilson immediately realized that this was a trap for him. How could Osman have time to turn his spearhead to the Mediterranean at this moment? Didn't Russia put enough pressure on him on the northern front? But what else could he say? Say I won't go? Wouldn't that be an excuse for Brian to remove him? At this moment, the Duke of Orleans, who had been silent before, suddenly said, Archbishop Brian, if we want to unite with Russia, it will definitely anger the Ottomans. It may not be safe for Count Verson to go to Constantinople now. It was not once or twice that the Ottoman Empire detained or even killed envoys from Catholic countries for various reasons. Of course, the latter was often rude to Ottoman envoys. Joseph immediately looked at Verson and said seriously, Count Verson, this is a time to show your professionalism as a diplomat. Viren was furious and could only nod with a sullen face. I will complete the mission. Brian then talked about some details of the operation in the Barbary Sea. After Queen Mary signed the action plan, she took out another document with a smile. Next, we need to discuss the plans proposed by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince in major cities. A bill to establish a grain reserve depot. Joseph suddenly thought of something and said to Verson, Count Verson, after you arrive in Constantinople, you must immediately notify the ambassador to the Ottomans and ask him and the embassy staff to return home as soon as possible. We might declare war on the Ottomans, in which case they would be very dangerous. Virgin's face turned green. After talking for a long time, you also know that place is not safe. Why don't you say that the ambassador to the Ottoman Empire should have diplomatic professionalism now? I just need to be educated, right? He gritted his teeth and uttered a few words. Okay, I will remind them. Then, everyone began to discuss issues related to food. Since everyone's interests were relatively consistent in this area, the motions were passed smoothly. Joseph also obtained a special allocation of 3 million livres to purchase grain. This is all the funds that the French finance can currently provide. After the cabinet meeting ended, all the ministers left with satisfaction, except for Virgin and the Duke of Orleans, whose faces were gloomy. Joseph walked out of the golden door and remembered the news sent by Fleuzel this morning, saying that the preparations for Paris Fashion Week had been completed, so he decided to go to the Tuileries Palace to see the situation. As soon as he walked around the corner of the corridor, he suddenly felt like there were eyes full of resentment looking at him. He hurriedly turned around and saw the two Sicilian princesses bowing their heads and bowing silently. What happened to this little girl? Joseph suddenly slapped his forehead. By the way, he seemed to have promised to take her to visit Paris, but he was so busy these days that he forgot all about it. He hurriedly stepped forward, stroked his chest and saluted, and said with a smile, "My beautiful princess, I wonder if I'm lucky enough to visit Paris with you." The resentment in Princess Maria's eyes was immediately swept away, and she nodded repeatedly with a smile. "Thank you for the invitation, Your Highness. I'm very happy." Chapter 149 Eden Playground. Northwest side of the Palace of Versailles. In the music room of the Little Trianon Palace, Queen Mary signaled the musicians to pause, turned to look at the palace officials aside, frowned and asked, "Are you sure you heard clearly?" "Yes, Your Majesty." His Royal Highness the Crown Prince was having his carriage prepared. By this time, he and Princess Maria should have left the Palace of Versailles. Queen Mary seemed a little anxious. This official was responsible for taking care of the Princess of the Two Sicilies. He had just reported that the Dauphin was going to Paris with Maria Point. If Clementine didn't rush to Paris, her son's heart would probably be stolen by that Italian girl. The Queen sighed. "My poor niece, you are really unlucky." Clementine originally set out very early, and the plan was to arrive in Marseille by boat first, and then go to Paris. As a result, as soon as she boarded the ship, there was a storm in the Tyrrhenian Sea. In January every year, the weather in the Mediterranean is often not so calm. Point to be on the safe side, her escorts decided to take the overland route instead, heading north through the Alps via Echtal and on to France. Although it has been a long detour, if everything goes smoothly, she will still arrive in Paris earlier than the Princess of the Two Sicilies. Unexpectedly, before Clementine left Tuscany, news came of the serf rebellion in southwestern Austria due to Emperor Joseph II's reform of serfdom. Yes, those stupid guys actually opposed granting them freedom reform. Afterwards, poor Clementine had to wait until the storm in the Tyrrhenian Sea subsided before setting off. After her continuous rush, she had just arrived near Nevers and was still 3 or 4 days away from Paris. Queen Mary took up a pen and wrote a letter urging her niece to speed up and gave it to the messenger to send out. She prayed in her heart that her son would never fall in love with that Princess Maria. On the Champs-Élysées in Paris, in the Paris Angel store, the Crown Prince's guards lined up in 2 rows side by side, separating the Crown Prince and Princess from other probing customers. Yes, this was the first place Maria wanted to visit. Sure enough, all women cannot resist the temptation to make themselves beautiful. Point the princess, who wore exquisite makeup and a light purple tutu skirt, was dazzlingly beautiful. Point she glanced at the luxuriously packaged cosmetics and meditated on their functions. Her eyes flashed with surprise, but she reservedly selected only a few products and asked the clerk to hand them over to the maid. Point Joseph thought that his attack plan had caused unreasonable disaster to Princess Maria, and he had always planned to compensate her. When he saw that she was very interested in cosmetics, he immediately asked the clerk to get a gold card and gave it to Princess Maria. Point the latter held a golden card worth 1,000 livres, and his heart was already bubbling with happiness. His Royal Highness the Crown Prince really did have me in his heart, and he gave me such an expensive gift on our first date. God, thank you so much. Later, Joseph helped her choose a lot of cosmetics, plus the younger version of Lady's Joy, Miss Daughter's Health Oral Liquid, a big bag full, and asked the clerk to send it directly to Maria's room in the Palace of Versailles. Coming out of the store, Maria looked at Joseph with a smile and asked softly, "Your Royal Highness, where should we go next?" Joseph remembered his original plan to check the preparations for the fashion week. It was just in time to take the princess to experience it in advance. Maybe she would have any good suggestions for modifications. Let's go visit the Tuileries Palace. As you may have heard, Paris Fashion Week will be held there soon. It's basically decorated now. Well, I listened to you. When the motorcade left the Paris Angel store, what Joseph didn't expect was that a reporter was already writing an article about the Crown Prince and the Princess of the Two Sicilies visited the store and sent gold cards to express their feelings. Outside the Tuileries Palace. Point Princess Maria looked across the large villa area under construction and immediately saw the tall, circular facility on the north side of the Tuileries garden. She immediately pointed there and asked curiously, "Your Highness, what is that for?" Joseph glanced at her finger and said, "Oh, this is called a Ferris wheel." It is a kind of amusement ride. Sitting on it, you can go to a very high place and overlook the scenery of Paris. By the way, there is a playground around the Ferris wheel with a lot of fun things. If you are willing, please let me take you to see it. I am extremely happy. Thank you, Your Highness. Soon, the carriage stopped in front of the Garden of Eden, the world's first dedicated amusement park. Point through the white fence. You can see that there are steam engine driven carousels, Ferris wheels, pirate ships, horror houses, coffee cups and other facilities, as well as some traditional amusement rides such as slides and swings, of course, due to technical reasons. Most facilities are far less large than those in later generations of amusement parks. For example, the Ferris wheel is only more than 10 meters high. The main body was modified from a water wheel. It was nothing compared to the big guys that could easily reach hundreds of meters in later generations. But for people in the 18th century, this was already a very novel and shocking thing. Point. As soon as Mariah stepped into the gate of the amusement park, she looked around excitedly, just like the little girls who went to the amusement park in later generations. However, what attracted her first was the fairy tale-like carousel. She turned her head and asked Joseph carefully, "Your Highness, is this allowed to be played?" "Of course, you can go up and give it a try." Joseph smiled and nodded, then motioned to the amusement park administrator to start the rides. The carousel was powered by a 12 horsepower steam engine. Of course, the steam engine was a product of the Watt Company. France's own steam engine manufacturing plant is still under construction. Point. After waiting for more than 20 minutes, white smoke came out of the cabin next to the carousel, which was the steam engine used to drive it. Point. Immediately, the huge wooden chassis slowly started to rotate. Under the action of the lever, the lifelike wooden horses, wooden deer, wooden elephants, etc. carved on it began to rise and fall, and rotated together with the disc. Point. Mariah took 2 steps back in confusion. Joseph smiled, pulled her onto the wooden disc, and gestured around. "Which one do you want to ride on?" Mariah pointed to the white wooden swan carefully. "Is this okay?" "Of course. I'll help you up." Joseph gentlemanly helped the girl onto the seat on the back of the swan. The princess sat sideways nervously, holding tightly to the wooden vertical pole with both hands, and began to fly up and down in accordance with the sound of music playing on the side. Point. Although due to the low power of the steam engine and the rough connection of the mechanical device, the speed of the merry-go-round was as slow as a snail, but the princess, who had never had a similar experience, still laughed excitedly, feeling as if she was in a fairy tale. In the world, riding a swan soaring in the sky. Point. Thanks to Maulegs and Honey Mountain for their generous rewards for this book. The young author is grateful because today is the last day for double monthly votes this month. Cheyenne Haitian begs readers to vote more for this book. It's not appropriate to write a new book. Your support is my greatest encouragement. Chapter 150. I'm going to kiss you. After playing for nearly half an hour, Princess Mariah reluctantly got off the carousel, as happy as if she had really arrived in the Garden of Eden. Point. This kind of fun machine makes people feel like they are in a place in a fairy tale. The person who invented it is definitely a genius among geniuses. With this thought in mind, she already ran towards the next ride. Point. Holding a small umbrella on the happy rafting boat, she sat side by side with the Crown Prince, rippling along the water and enjoying the warm afternoon sunshine. On the pirate ship, she hugged the Crown Prince's arm tightly, closed her eyes and screamed. It was a real ship, dragged from the Seine River. A steam engine drove wooden wheels, and the bottom of the ship was rubbed again and again to push it into the air. Well, it actually can only reach the height of an adult's chest, but for Her Royal Highness, it feels like she is being tossed around by a giant, which is so exciting that her heart is about to jump out of her chest. Point. However, what she didn't expect was that there would be more exciting things to come. Point. That place is called the House of Horrors. More than 10 minutes later, Princess Mariah was so frightened by a red-faced devil with goats hooves to horns on its head and holding a steel fork that she jumped directly into Joseph's arms, hugged him tightly, and prayed loudly while crying, "God bless. Woo woo. Drive away all evil spirits. Woo woo woo." Joseph had no choice but to ask the scaring workers to evacuate and carry the princess hanging on him out of the House of Horror. After waiting for a long time, the latter finally believed that what he just saw was not a devil and gradually stopped choking. At this moment, Mariah's eyes, red from crying, suddenly caught a glimpse of the wooden sign not far away. The Ferris wheel exists to cross the sky with the one she loves. As the Ferris wheel gets higher and higher, we get closer and closer to God. When the Ferris wheel reaches the highest point, if you kiss the person you like, God will give you blessings and let you be together forever. She only hesitated for half a second, then stood up abruptly from the chair where she was resting, pointed at the Ferris wheel, blushed, and whispered to Joseph, "Your Highness, are you willing to play this with me?" Joseph had long forgotten the publicity stunt he had made for the Ferris wheel, and nodded without hesitation. "It's an honor to ride with you, Your Highness." Mariah's heart skipped a beat. The fact that the Crown Prince did not refuse to sit on the crossing the sky with the one he loves machine with her showed that he was interested in her. The girl's face suddenly turned redder, and she didn't dare to continue thinking. The piston of the steam engine that was to drive the Ferris wheel began to reciprocate, and the Ferris wheel slowly rotated, making a slight creak sound. Joseph knew that Fliezel had done a lot of tests before, and the safety should be guaranteed, but the sound of the wood joints still made him feel insecure. In the small Ferris wheel sightseeing compartment, Mariah lowered her head and sat opposite the Crown Prince, feeling the two of them gradually rise into the air. She couldn't help but start thinking about it. When we approach the highest point, I will look at the Crown Prince affectionately, and what should I say? "Your eyes are really charming." No, it would be better to say "You are the most charming person I have ever met," or "Thank God for letting me meet you." Just say it. Then he might take my hand, in which case I should close my eyes and wait. If he doesn't move, then I will get closer to him, very close, and he won't be able to dodge. No, he definitely won't. Then I will pluck up the courage and kiss his soft lips gently. When Mariah thought of this, her whole body felt as if she had a high fever, red and hot. Will he hold me? Will you propose to me? Or kiss me back harder? What should I do? What to do? She felt a huge sense of happiness surge over her head, making her dizzy. Why so dizzy? Mariah suddenly felt so dizzy that she could hardly breathe. Could it be that, before leaving the Palace of Versailles, she asked Alyssa to tighten her waist too tightly? She hurriedly raised her head and wanted to take a deep breath, but her eyes suddenly saw a person on the ground that was as big as an apple, and the top of the tree that looked like a ball of grass. Her pupils suddenly shrank to the smallest size, and a huge feeling of terror took over her whole body. Then her heart started beating wildly, and her whole body shook violently, uncontrollably. This is the highest point of the Ferris wheel. I want to kiss you. As the last thought flashed through Mariah's mind, her slender neck tilted, and she fainted on the seat. Your Highness Princess. Joseph was startled and hurriedly supported her. In order to reduce the weight of the Ferris wheel, the upper part of the sightseeing compartment is open. Fortunately, a safety rope is tied, otherwise she may have fallen. Mariah imagined everything perfectly and was almost successful, but she didn't expect that she was afraid of heights. Sometime later, in a room in the Tuileries Palace that had been converted into a high-end hotel, the Princess of the Tuileries woke up leisurely under the stench of smelling salts. She heard the woman wearing a white robe say, "Your Highness." The princess must have been greatly stimulated and fainted, but she should be fine now. Rest more and she will recover soon. Thank you for coming all the way, Dr. Perna. Mariah connected the previous memories together and realized that she had fainted at the most critical moment of her confession. She was immediately ashamed and angry. If her whole body hadn't been so limp and weak, she would have wanted to slap herself twice. She raised her eyes and saw the anxious Crown Prince next to the bed and suddenly felt warm in her heart. His Highness was so worried about me, which meant that he cared about me. Joseph also wiped his sweat. Who would have thought that this princess is afraid of heights? Fortunately, it's okay. If someone scares the little girl, it won't turn into a diplomatic dispute. Perna packed the medicine box silently, feeling a little sad in her heart. She was a little happy when His Highness called her to come, but she didn't expect that she was treating His Highness the Princess. At this time, on the avenue 100 kilometers away from Paris, a group of carriages and horses were speeding at high speed. In the middle carriage There is a cute girl in her early 10 years, wearing a pink dress, to colorful feathers in her bun, a pair of big light blue eyes, and a baby fat face. Neatly folded Queen Mary's letter, and stuffed it back into the envelope. She looked at the middle-aged man sitting opposite, puffed up her cheeks and said, "Count Fernando, my dear aunt urges us to get to Paris as soon as possible." The middle-aged man nodded. "I heard that the Princess of the Two Sicilies seems to be very popular with His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, but..." The girl raised her little nose and said confidently, "My aunt just likes to worry too much. Although my luck is not good, I have extraordinary charm. I must be the one who wins your highness's heart in the end. Thanks to my operating officer, MuQIU, for voting for me 14 times in September. This is really the most monthly tickets I have ever received in one go. So touching. Woo 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 dear readers, there is still the last half hour of double monthly pass." The little author is rolling around in tears, hugging his thighs, and begging everyone to give me 2 more votes. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.